Ugh! The knight lay groaning in pain, his face contorted, revealing the intensity of his pain. Just then, the door opened, and Lord Barkin entered the room. "How are you feeling?" Lord Barkin asked him. "I will recover in a few days, my lord. My apologies," the knight replied. "You should apologize to me. My foolish disciple was defeated by an unknown barbarian." A voice rang out as an old man appeared from the lord. "Master," the knight shouted as his face stiffened. He attempted to rise and pay his respects, but the sudden movement only intensified his pain. Noticing this, the old man, Kine, waved his hand dismissively. "Enough, you won't be getting up anyway." Kine scrutinized the knight, who felt as if every part of his body was being thoroughly examined. "Your internal organs are damaged, but not severely. You will recover in a few days. Now take off your shirt," Kine said. "Why, yes." The knight hesitantly removed his shirt, revealing smooth skin without a single scar. "Not even a scratch," Kine murmured, intrigued. He had seen the knight's armor before coming here. It had been utterly wrecked by the barbarian, as if hit by a ballista. The armor's condition was so dire that it wouldn't have been surprising if that knight had died. Yet, the knight's body bore no wounds, and his internal injuries were minor enough to heal within days. "This isn't just some brute of a barbarian. He controlled his strength with great precision," Kine concluded. "Is that so?" Lord Barkin said. And there was consideration behind it. Consideration. Yes, it was a duel. If he had wanted, he could have left the knight permanently crippled. Although the duel was supposed to be without injuries, there was no guarantee the agreement would be honored. Yet, the barbarian had crushed the armor without leaving any physical damage, ensuring the knight's injuries were superficial. "A considerate barbarian, that's hard to believe," Kine remarked. This also meant the barbarian was far beyond the knight's level. He is at least transcendent. Even if his foolish disciple was an advanced knight, the gap in their abilities shouldn't have been so wide that he would fall so easily. Lord Barkin gulped nervously before asking cautiously, "Forgive me, but could he match someone like you, Master Kine?" "No matter how strong he is, I am still a swordmaster," Kine replied. A swordmaster was someone who had reached the pinnacle of swordsmanship, mastering techniques of their own creation. "Even a transcendent can never defeat me." "I see," Lord Barkin replied. He exhaled in relief. If Kine could handle this unknown factor, it would seem that he could control the barbarian's actions. Still, to wield such power without aura, that's no ordinary feat. Could this be the strength of a barbarian from the White Snowfield? Kine muttered to himself. He had heard from the Lord that Kettle claimed to hail from the White Snowfield. At first, he thought it was a lie, but the evidence now made him reconsider. Kine rubbed his chin, interest flickering in his eyes. Maybe he is an anomaly. "I'm sorry," Lord Barkin asked. "No, never mind. That's very unlikely. Anomalies wouldn't show consideration toward humans. It must be my imagination. But the White Snowfield, why now of all times?" Kine shook his head, as if the very existence of the White Snowfield presented a troublesome issue. "Is something wrong?" Lord Barkin asked, puzzled. The White Snowfield was a desolate, forsaken place. Apart from reckless adventurers, no one paid it any mind. While a few had returned alive, they had brought back no useful information. Even Milena, who encountered Kettle during her clandestine weapons trade in a war-torn nation, had kept that fact hidden. In short, the White Snowfield was essentially excluded from human affairs. Yet, Kine spoke of it as if it were a significant problem. Kine waved his hand dismissively. "Something for later. His Majesty, the Emperor, has peculiar interests these days. No need to concern yourself for now." I understand." Lord Barkin gulped nervously. If the Emperor was involved, it was far beyond the concerns of a rural lord. "Is the barbarian still in the estate?" Kine asked. "He mentioned staying for a while, so I believe so." "I will need to confirm that myself," Kine said, vanishing from the spot. Kettle stepped out of the Lord's castle, having received his reward. It had been an enjoyable time for him. He had met a noble, been served by a maid, and even fought a knight. He had even witnessed an unusual and fascinating swordsmanship. On top of all that, he received gold coins, leaving him thoroughly satisfied. "What do you plan to do now?" the guard commander asked. Kettle stroked his chin at the guard commander's question. "I don't have specific plans, but it would be good to establish a recognized identity. I don't plan to leave the estate immediately, but it might become an issue to enter dungeons without it whenever I visit a new estate." Kettle lacked a confirmed identity. Naturally, there were ways to establish one. The guard commander replied, "There are several methods for you to confirm your identity, but the simplest is to find a sponsor. If someone of high status acknowledges you, that would serve as proof of your identity. And, alternatively, you could pay a significant sum of money, but the most common route is to become a mercenary. By building a record of accomplishments and gaining recognition from the guild, you can achieve it. However, being a mercenary was typically the last resort for those without backing. Being a mercenary was a troublesome, often thankless job. Unless one reached a certain level, mercenaries were little more than errand runners. Given Kettle's strength, finding a sponsor would have been the most straightforward method. The guard commander was about to suggest asking the Lord to act as his sponsor when Kettle's eyes lit up. "A mercenary," Kettle shouted. His excitement was palpable. "That's an option too." Taking on quests and slaying monsters as a mercenary was one of the things Kettle wanted to do in this fantasy world. It was the epitome of the fantasy world. "Can I register as a mercenary here as well?" Kettle asked. "Well, there is a guild hall." "Then please guide me." Kettle beamed with excitement, leaving the guard commander nodding in a daze. Mercenaries roamed the world, taking on various commissions. For some, they were the stuff of dreams, wandering across the world, uncovering its secrets. Tales of young nobles running away from home out of admiration for mercenaries were not uncommon. However, the reality of mercenaries was far from glamorous. They were society's underbelly, no different from the lowest class. Lacking stable jobs or recognition, mercenaries were at the very bottom of the social hierarchy. They were errand runners for all kinds of menial tasks. Even mercenaries with adequate strength often met their end by challenging unknown dungeons. It was expected. No one would risk a guard with a confirmed identity in such dangerous work. Mercenaries served as sacrificial pawns. A select few reached the pinnacle of their craft and gained proper recognition, receiving the treatment they deserved. But they were the exception, not the rule. Thus, mercenaries were considered the dregs of society, coarse, unruly, and noisy. The guild hall, where mercenaries gathered, was no exception. It was a chaotic place, filled with shouting and laughter. In the middle of the day, people were already guzzling alcohol, staggering about in drunken stupors. Broken tables and chairs littered the space. One drunk stumbled into another, who stood with a scowl and delivered a punch to his face. "You bastard, how dare you bump into me? Do you want to go?" The man who had been struck rose, unwilling to back down. Others joined in, either taking sides or watching the brawl for entertainment. A full-blown fight erupted in no time. Meanwhile, the receptionists calmly sorted through documents, unfazed by the commotion. "Rosa, how are the new recruits?" "They are hopeless." The receptionist named Rosa shook her head, her blonde hair swaying. "Even if they're strong, they're all weirdos. One claims to be a paladin, but he's clearly delusional. And there's that thief. The priestess seems decent, but because of her affiliations, no one is going to trust her." "Is that so? What a shame." The other receptionist didn't seem too disappointed, as good mercenaries were as rare as benevolent demons. At that moment, a mercenary approached Rosa hesitantly. After some deliberation, he took a deep breath and walked up to her, flashing a toothy grin. It was meant to be charming, but it came across as excessively cringe. "Rosa, if you're free tonight, how about?" the mercenary said. "No, thank you." Rosa smiled politely as she declined, her expression icy. The mercenary slumped away, shoulders drooping. The other receptionist burst out laughing. "That's the fifth one, Rosa. Maybe you should at least have dinner with one of them. It's pitiful." "No way. Mercenaries are all idiots," Rosa replied, shaking her head in exasperation. She despised mercenaries. They were rude, ignorant, and uneducated. They fought constantly and lacked any foresight for the future. She had even been endangered several times when caught up in their fights. "Ah, if only Prince Charming would come and rescue me," Rosa thought. Twisting a strand of her hair, Rosa sighed. She dreamed of a dashing, handsome prince who would take her away from this desk job, fully aware of how unrealistic her fantasies were. But dreaming was the only way she could endure her current reality. The brawl in the Guildhall grew fiercer, and the receptionists began to look concerned. "It's about time we stopped this. Should we call the guards?" the receptionist asked. "Maybe we should," Rosa replied. As she got up to summon the guards, something happened. The door opened with a small sound, and there stood a massive barbarian. "This is the Guildhall," the guard commander said. "Oh, thank you for bringing me there," Kettle replied. The guard commander watched Kettle for a moment before taking his leave. "Well, this is as far as I go. For anything else, just ask the receptionists directly." "Understood." The guard commander had tried to dissuade him, suggesting he seek the Lord's recognition instead of becoming a mere mercenary. However, Kettle was adamant. He wanted to be a mercenary. It was as if the idea of being a mercenary carried an allure, a romantic appeal for him. To the guard commander, it was baffling. Kettle wasn't some naive noble. He was a barbarian. He didn't know why a barbarian would harbor such a notion. In the end, the commander decided to stay silent and let Kettle do his thing. Creak. Kettle stepped into the Guildhall. The already unstable floor groaned under his massive weight, threatening to give way. Thud, thud. His heavy footsteps echoed as he advanced further inside. The commotion and brawling that had dominated the room moments before came to an abrupt halt. Mercenaries were simple and direct. They knew one thing for sure. This barbarian was someone who could crush their heads like ripe fruit if they crossed him. An eerie silence filled the room, unusual for the normally chaotic Guildhall. Weren't mercenaries supposed to be noisy? He thought. Kettle found it odd. I guess mercenaries can be quiet too. Perhaps mercenaries could be polite and refined, contrary to the rough image he had in mind. Deciding to embrace the full spectrum of fantasy life, he noted this observation. Mercenaries can be quiet and polite. Satisfied with his conclusion, he walked up to a trembling mercenary. The man's eyes darted about in panic. "Excuse me, may I ask something?" Kettle asked him. "Why, yes, what do you need?" the mercenary quickly replied. "Where are the receptionists?" "Tea there, over there." The mercenary hastily pointed toward the reception desk. Kettle grinned. "Thank you." The mercenary nodded shakily, his face pale. Kettle approached the reception desk. The receptionists instinctively pushed their chairs back until they hit the wall. They began praying silently, "Please, not me. Let him go to someone else." Thud. Kettle stepped in front of the desk. He said cheerfully, "Nice to meet you." "Ah," Rosa, the chosen receptionist, went pale. "Why me?" Rosa lamented internally. She wanted to scream. "Is it because I had arrogantly dreamed of Prince Charming rescuing me from my job? I am allowed to dream." However, instead of a prince, here was a barbarian, twice her size, looming over her. The barbarian sat down quietly. The chair creaked under his weight as if crying in protest. "Pleasure to meet you," Kettle said with a smile. Rosa squeezed her eyes shut. Hello." Kettle noticed her fear. Though he hated to admit it, his appearance was clearly intimidating to others. "I don't intend to cause any trouble. You can relax," he said gently. "Okay, yes." His calm tone helped Rosa regain a bit of composure. "I am a receptionist, a recognized citizen of this estate. If he harms me, he will become the Lord's enemy. He can't touch me. He will become a criminal otherwise," she thought. Rosa clung to this logic, slowly calming herself. Meanwhile, Kettle believed his words had worked wonders. As expected, I am a calming presence. I want to become a mercenary, Kettle stated. A mercenary? Do you have any proof of identity? Rosa asked him. Unfortunately, I do not. I see. Rosa gulped and began the registration process. What's your reason for becoming a mercenary? I have several reasons, but primarily to gain recognition for my identity. I've heard that working as a mercenary can achieve that. Is that true? Yes, but it requires a significant record of achievements. Are you okay with that? That's fine. After several routine questions, Rosa continued. The registration fee is 5 silver coins. Kettle handed over the coins without hesitation. He had more than enough from clearing the dungeon and fighting Lord Barkan's knight. What is your name and age? Rosa asked him. Kettle, just Kettle. As for my age, I'm not sure. I'll make an approximate entry. Rosa finished the registration. Your registration is complete. Here is your mercenary badge. Do not lose it. It symbolizes your status as a mercenary. Kettle received a wooden pendant and hung it around his neck, smiling in satisfaction. Excellent. He was officially a mercenary now. And now, he said, what quests are available? I want to start right away. Q quests, of course. Rosa picked up the quest board with practiced ease but froze as realization dawned. Her expression stiffened. Kettle waited eagerly, anticipation clear on his face. He wondered what adventures awaited him and what kind of thrilling quests lay ahead. Rosa closed her eyes tightly. You can read, correct? Here are the quests currently available to you. Kettle took the quest list with an excited grin, scanning the contents. His brows furrowed. Is that all? The available quests were all simple. Collecting herbs outside the village, cleaning the basement, clearing the sewers, etc. There were menial tasks, barely worthy of being called quests. Rosa stammered. There are more quests, but as an F-rank mercenary, these are the ones you're eligible for. Kettle expected this to happen. Anyone could become a mercenary, but true recognition required time and effort. Completing numerous simple tasks, steadily building a record, and eventually climbing the ranks was the only path. Even the current king of mercenaries had started this way. There were no shortcuts in the mercenary world. For now, all Kettle could do were errands. Kettle muttered, stroking his chin. Rosa braced herself for an outburst. How dare you give me such petty tasks? Do you think I'm some errand boy? Many mercenaries from her previous encounters reacted this way, only to be subdued by the guards. However, this time she couldn't rely on the guards. She didn't think any guards could handle someone like Kettle, whose arm was thicker than her waist. However, instead of an outburst, Kettle calmly pointed to one of the quests. This one will do. Excuse me, Rosa blinked. His finger rested on the herb collection quest. Are you sure about this? She asked, surprised. A task is a task, is it not? I see no problem. I see. I understand that I haven't earned your trust yet, Kettle said matter-of-factly. It made sense. They wouldn't entrust important missions to an unknown barbarian. I will start small and earn your trust. Isn't that natural? Kettle asked her. Why, yes, that's true. Rosa was taken aback. His reasoning was logical, almost unnervingly so. Where can I find these herbs? Outside the village. They look like this, Rosa said, showing him a sample. Got it, I'll be off then. With that, Kettle left the guild hall. As the door closed behind him, the tension in the room finally eased. The mercenaries let out sighs of relief and collapsed into their seats. The guards at the outer gate recoiled in shock at the sight of Kettle. He casually pulled out his mercenary badge. I've accepted a quest to gather herbs. They don't grow within the estate, so I will need to step outside. Is that permitted? Why, yes, it is. The guard hastily opened the gate, his demeanor making it clear he wanted to avoid spending another second in the barbarian's presence. I have no intention of causing trouble, so you can relax, Kettle said as he felt a twinge of hurt. Of course, the guard muttered, trying to maintain composure. Kettle stepped outside, greeted by the vibrant green of the fields and the rich brown of the earth. A smile spread across his face. Wonderful, just wonderful. He made his way to the area where the herbs were said to grow. There, he found several plants resembling the sample he had been shown. Herbs that help with wounds, huh? Fascinating, Kettle mused. Though he wasn't particularly knowledgeable about plants, these herbs were distinctly different from those on Earth. Despite his massive form, Kettle crouched down and carefully began harvesting the herbs. It was a tedious, repetitive task, digging delicately to avoid damaging the roots and ensuring the leaves remained intact. Most would find it dull, but Kettle found it immensely satisfying. Harvesting magical herbs in a fantasy world was an adventure in itself, and the process brought him great joy. After an hour of work, he returned to the guild hall. The previously rowdy space grew silent once more. "Here, all done," Kettle announced, placing a large pouch of herbs on the desk. That's a lot," Rosa started in astonishment at the sheer volume of herbs. It was 5 times the amount she had expected. As she inspected them one by one, her surprise only deepened. "They're in excellent condition." Harvesting herbs wasn't just yanking them out of the ground. It required careful digging to avoid damaging the roots and gentle handling to keep the leaves pristine. Most mercenaries brought back herbs that were barely usable, their value diminished by careless harvesting. Rosa hadn't expected much from Kettle either. After all, he was a barbarian, known for their brute strength and lack of finesse. Surely, someone like him wouldn't put effort into carefully harvesting herbs. However, she was wrong. Nearly all the herbs were flawless, with intact roots and leaves. It was as if they had been gathered by a seasoned herbalist. "I take pride in my delicate hands," Kettle said proudly. "I see," Rosa stammered as she hurriedly processed the herbs and handed over his reward. "Here it is." She placed a single silver coin in Kettle's hand. It was 1 silver coin. From what Kettle knew, it was barely enough to cover a cheap meal at a tavern for a day. Considering the vast amount of herbs he'd brought back, it was a meager sum. Yet Kettle smiled with satisfaction. Completing a mercenary quest and receiving a fitting reward, there was a unique sense of accomplishment in this that clearing dungeons couldn't provide. "Good, what's the next quest?" Kettle asked. "You want to do another one?" Rosa asked, astonished. "Of course, the sun's still high. There's plenty to do." Kettle scanned the quest board and pointed to a new task, clearing a warehouse. "I'll take this one." "Okay, please do." "Does he enjoy cleaning?" Rosa wondered, her face pale as she nodded. Cleaning the warehouse turned out to be straightforward. It involved moving heavy objects, which posed no challenge for Kettle. The only hiccup was when the warehouse keeper, terrified at the sight of Kettle, swung a club and begged for his life. Next came a street cleaning quest. With a broom in his hand, Kettle swept the streets. At first, he misjudged his strength, creating a dust storm that engulfed several passers-by. But other than that, he completed the task without major issues. And so, Kettle continued to take on and complete quests, one after another. From the rooftop, Kine watched with confusion. The barbarian had integrated himself into the estate remarkably smoothly. Of course, his massive frame and intimidating appearance made him stand out, and the locals were still terrified of him. But strangely, he wasn't causing any trouble. This incongruity gnawed at Kine. "What is he doing?" he muttered. Based on his disciples' skills, Kettle was at least at the transcendent level, a being capable of influencing an entire kingdom if he so desired. With that kind of power, he could demand respect and recognition anywhere he went. And as a barbarian, a race known for their strength-based worldview, such behavior would be expected. Kine had dealt with enough barbarians to know this. Yet here Kettle was, organizing warehouses, picking up trash, and doing menial chores anyone could perform. And he wasn't doing them half-heartedly. He approached each task with earnest dedication. Why is he doing this? Kine wondered. To him, these menial jobs were meaningless and beneath someone of Kettle's power. With just a display of strength, Kettle could command admiration, power, and prestige. But he seemed utterly uninterested in such things, instead contentedly sweeping the streets with a cheerful face. By the end of the day, Kettle had completed 15 quests. He returned to his lodgings with a few silver coins in hand, looking completely satisfied. The next day was Kettle's second day in civilization. He woke up brimming with energy. "Let's get started, shall we?" he exclaimed. Being a mercenary was exhilarating. Just the thought of it made his heart race. However, before diving into work, there was something else he wanted to do. The Barkan estate was a sizable domain, and Kettle had yet to fully explore it. So, before heading to the guild hall, he decided to tour the area, a kind of sightseeing. Leaving the inn, Kettle strolled through the estate. With no specific destination in mind, he walked aimlessly, enjoying the simple act of moving through the streets. The locals, however, were less enthusiastic. Many hurriedly hid their children and walked in the opposite direction. Kettle paid them no mind, assuming they had suddenly become busy. As he wandered, a food cart caught his eye. Skewers of sizzling meat were being grilled to perfection. "Oh," he murmured. Driven by hunger and curiosity, Kettle approached the cart. The vendor's face turned pale. "How much?" Kettle asked him. "2 copper coins," the vendor replied. It was surprisingly cheap. The skewers were generously seasoned with various spices. "I'll take one," Kettle handed over the coins. The clearly terrified vendor extended the skewer to him while keeping as much distance as possible, as if afraid of breaking under Kettle's touch. Chewing on the skewer, Kettle smiled in satisfaction. "It's delicious." The seasoning was unique, slightly tangy, mildly sweet, and unlike anything he had ever tasted. Skewer in hand, he continued his leisurely exploration of the estate. During his stroll, he purchased a notebook. This world was vastly different from what he knew. Elves were barbaric, and dungeons held unique characteristics. It felt necessary to document these discoveries. From now on, he planned to organize his findings in the notebook. Satisfied with his purchase, he glanced upward toward a nearby rooftop. "Who is that?" Kettle thought. Since yesterday, he had felt someone's presence watching him. Assuming it was Lord Barkan's spy, he had chosen to ignore it, but the persistent gaze from above was starting to bother him. Still, he decided not to dwell on it. His priority now was to enjoy himself. He walked on, savoring the sights and sounds of the estate. That alone was delightful. While wandering, he saw a building. A library, he thought. The sign on the outer wall clearly labeled it as such. Kettle was intrigued by the place filled with books. He entered the library. "Welcome," a woman, presumably the librarian, looked up from her book and froze when she saw Kettle. After a brief pause, she screamed shrilly, "Eek!" Kettle was accustomed to people reacting to him with fear. Calm as always, he attempted to reassure her. "I am a mercenary," he said, showing his mercenary badge. "May I read some books here? I have no intention of causing harm, nor will I damage the books. You have my word." "Okay," the librarian nodded hesitantly, her voice trembling. Satisfied that he had convinced her, Kettle walked toward the shelves with a contented smile. "Quite the collection," he muttered. He scanned the titles with keen interest, clearly able to read and comprehend them. Outside the library, Kine, the swordmaster, observed Kettle and frowned. Though the barbarian was out of sight, Kine's heightened senses allowed him to perceive every movement inside. It was baffling to him. A barbarian that can read, Kine thought. Literacy required significant education. While education had become more widespread, even among commoners, it was far from universal. However, Kine had never heard of a literate barbarian. Kettle handled the books with practiced ease. He retrieved one, sat down, and began reading with natural familiarity. He's done this before, Kine thought to himself. Kettle's fast reading suggested he had read hundreds, if not thousands, of books. His demeanor resembled that of a well-educated scholar. Yet Kettle was a barbarian, a man from the white snowfield. According to the Lord, Kettle had only recently entered human civilization. Kine could not comprehend that a barbarian from the harsh white snowfield could be deeply familiar with books, let alone literate. His mind spun with questions. He wondered if he was the only one who could read, or if all the barbarians from the white snowfield could read. But regardless of Kine's bewilderment, Kettle remained entirely focused on the book in his hands. He touched its cover, ran his fingers along the pages, and examined it carefully. The librarian, meanwhile, watched him with a nervous expression, as though expecting him to rip the book apart any moment. The material quality is excellent, Kettle thought. His thoughts wandered briefly to the meat skewer he had eaten earlier. It was very similar to the book he was reading. The quality of the meat had been surprisingly high. Perhaps this estate had a better economy than he had initially assumed. At the very least, it was far from resembling Old England, where people survived on nothing but potatoes and coffee. Having satisfied his curiosity about the book's physical properties, Kettle turned his attention to its contents. The book he had chosen was a history of the continent, a comprehensive record of its past events up to the present day. As he skimmed through its pages, his eyes widened. So I guess the Empire won in the end. Milena had once supplied weapons to the kingdom at war with the Empire, and it appeared that the Empire had emerged victorious from the war. As he read further, it became apparent just how powerful the Empire had become. The kingdom to which the Barkan estate belonged was now a vassal state, subordinate to the Empire. The Empire had devoured half of the human world and was advancing aggressively, as though intent on consuming the entire world. World domination, Kettle thought. It was an ambition shared by many conquerors throughout Earth's history. This fantasy world, it seemed, was no different. However, Kettle's interest in human affairs was limited. What truly fascinated him lay elsewhere. He eagerly picked up another book, this one detailing non-human elements of this world. His eyes sparkled as he turned its pages. Reading as though he couldn't afford to miss a single word, he immersed himself in the text. To his delight, the book more than lived up to his expectations. The book contained the dwarven cave of Mantamia, which was filled with the world's greatest ores, such as mithril and adamantium, the fairy village of Pisarapia, which was said to hold every mystery imaginable, and Lejmeria, the celestial city that floated in the skies, inhabited by the Celestials. The book also catalogued countless cities and capitals, belonging to various non-human races. Kettle couldn't stop grinning. He had read similar accounts before, but those had all mere flights of fancy, products of human imagination. This world, however, was different. The fantastical places described in this book actually existed here. The realization filled Kettle with immense joy, almost to the point of losing himself. As he continued to devour the text, another piece of information caught his eye. Elfos Sagrado was a sacred ground for the elves, unapproachable by any race other than elves. Its location was a mystery, zealously protected and sought after by those in power. Even the mightiest rulers had failed to uncover it. Yet Kettle had the qualifications to enter. I should try to visit someday, Kettle thought. It would be rude to ignore such an invitation. Still, the world was brimming with too many other wonders to explore first. Kettle was the type to save the best for last. Suppressing his excitement, he turned his focus back to the book and continued reading. The more he read, the more Kettle's curiosity grew. Then, something caught his eye again. What's this? His head tilted in confusion. There are other places like the White Snowfield. The book was describing demon realms, regions of chaos and distortion. These were areas entirely unwelcoming to humans, each shrouded in mystery. The descriptions painted vivid pictures in his mind. The silent forest where all sound ceased, leaving unnerving stillness. The abyss, a bottomless chasm that could drag the world itself into its depth. The deep sea, home to mysterious primates unknown to science. There was also an area where it had no name, where existence itself seemed to unravel. Most important of all, the book contained information about the White Snowfield, which Kettle knew all too well. Beyond these were numerous other demon realms, each as alien and unreachable as the next. These mysterious, untouchable regions were staples of the fantasy world, yet Kettle's expression darkened as he considered their implications. Places like the White Snowfield, Kettle thought. His memories of the White Snowfield were far from fond. He had endured endless suffering in that desolate expanse. Without his unwavering thirst for adventure and discovery, he would surely have perished there. The thought of other demon realms that could rival the White Snowfield in harshness didn't inspire him. In fact, it filled him with unease, and he had no intention of visiting such places unless absolutely necessary. Even so, a question naturally arose in his mind. How big is this world anyway? The White Snowfield alone was unimaginably vast. Even after spending years there, he hadn't fully explored it. And now, he was learning that this was just one of many such places. Coupled with the lands of humans and those of other races, the sheer scale of this world was overwhelming. It's bigger than Earth, he concluded. That much was certain. Just how much bigger, however, was beyond him. It seemed this world had yet to measure its circumference, leaving its true size a mystery. Well, I think I've learned enough for now, Kettle said, standing up and brushing off his pants. The library wasn't particularly large, so there was little additional information for him to uncover. Still, he felt satisfied with what he had gleaned. Thank you for letting me look around, he said politely. You're welcome. The librarian stood and bowed, her tense shoulders relaxing slightly as she realized Kettle was leaving. She breathed a sigh of relief, but her respite was short-lived. I will visit again when I have the chance. I hope to see you again in the future, he said with a grin. Why, yes, she stammered weakly, her expression falling as she watched him leave. Kettle arrived at the guild hall. Just like the day before, the place was quiet. Kettle strode leisurely toward Rosa, who greeted him with a tense expression. Oh, you're here, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Yes, what quest do you have for me today? Kettle asked casually. Here they are. Rosa handed him a quest sheet, her hands a little steadier now. Kettle accepted it with a faint smile. As they conversed quietly, Rosa began to relax. Despite his intimidating appearance, Kettle proved to be surprisingly reasonable. Though there was an instinctual fear of him, it became clear that there was no real need to be terrified. After briefly examining the quest sheet, Kettle raised a finger to indicate his choice. I'll take this one today. Ah, this is an herb collection quest. Here is the sample. Rosa handed him a sample of the herb, and Kettle examined it before heading out. Just like the previous day, he went out to gather the herbs and returned to complete the quest. Afterward, he accepted a new one. All the tasks were trivial, menial jobs that anyone could have done. Watching this unfold, Kine felt as though he was going to burst with frustration. Why is he doing this? Kine thought. Kettle was incredibly strong. Even revealing just a fraction of his power would have earned him immediate recognition. There was no reason for him to waste time on such insignificant work. Kine couldn't understand any of this. The sight of someone as extraordinary as Kettle performing mundane tasks felt like watching a priceless gem being used for a child's play. Yet, Kettle himself seemed to genuinely enjoy these simple tasks. He is truly peculiar. There was something entirely alien about Kettle. Kine couldn't get a clear sense of who he really was. After mulling it over for a while, Kine made a decision. I will have to meet with him. Observing from a distance was no longer enough. If Kine wanted to gain any meaningful information about this enigmatic barbarian, he would need to speak with him directly. Swordmaster Kine resolved to confront Kettle face to face. Late at night, the estate was illuminated only by the moonlight. Having just completed his quest of patrolling the night, Kettle walked toward his lodging with a satisfied expression. Today, he had resolved more than a dozen quests. Although most of them were minor tasks, completing so many had proven to be quite profitable. The faster he worked, the sooner he could earn recognition as a true mercenary. It had been a productive day. Feeling relaxed, he leisurely made his way to his quarters. Then he saw an old man standing in his path. Half concealed in the shadows, the elderly figure lingered there. In the pitch-black night, illuminated only by moonlight, even a toddler would know it was dangerous to roam about. At this moment, only Kettle and the old man were present on the street. Kettle spoke first. "You've been following me all day. What do you want?" The old man, Swordmaster Kine, was taken aback, too shocked to respond immediately. He noticed, Kine thought, he hadn't merely been observing from afar. Despite Kettle's inability to use aura, he was undeniably a formidable individual. To conceal his presence, Kine had veiled himself with aura. No matter how sharp Kettle's senses might be, detecting him should have been impossible. Yet Kettle's tone suggested that he was well aware of the pursuit. When the old man failed to answer, Kettle's face darkened. "Are you a bandit?" he asked, tucking his silver coins securely into his coat. His wary gaze made Kine incredulous. Is he actually scared of encountering a bandit, with that massive body? Even seasoned brigands would retreat quietly at the sight of Kettle. However, his expression remained deadly serious. "No, Kine started to protest but closed his mouth. It was difficult to explain who he was. Declaring himself a swordmaster was unlikely to be believed. Moreover, his opponent was a barbarian. Lacking extensive knowledge, he couldn't be sure how to introduce himself effectively. Kettle took Kine's silence as confirmation that he was indeed a bandit. "So, even at your age, you've resorted to thievery. The economy must truly be in dire straits. What a pity," Kettle said with a chuckle. That laugh made Kine feel unsettled. Why is he laughing about being robbed? Does this barbarian crave bloodshed so much that he looks forward to killing someone? Of course, that wasn't the reason. To Kettle, encountering a bandit was just another adventure, something that added a bit of excitement to his life. "If I capture you, it will be another accomplishment on my record," Kettle remarked. "No, wait," Kine began, but he stopped himself. Upon reflection, this could be a good opportunity. Kine wasn't here to enjoy a casual tea party with a barbarian. He had shown himself to learn about Kettle's power and identity. Since he was mistaken for a bandit, a direct confrontation could serve his purpose. With that thought, Kine tensed his muscles. A standoff began between a barbarian and the swordmaster. The barbarian initiated the first move. He stomped the ground, and his figure vanished in an instant. Kine blinked, momentarily thinking the man had disappeared entirely. When Kettle reappeared, he was directly in front of him. "What?" Kine's eyes widened in alarm. If he stayed still, the barbarian's hand would grab his neck. He moved instinctively, guided by the survival instincts honed on countless battlefields. Kine drew upon his aura. The mysterious, miraculous power within him surged to life, circulating through his body in an instant. It granted him strength that defied comprehension. Kine stomped on the ground. Boom! The smooth stone pavement shattered as he leaped back at lightning speed. Kettle's hand sliced through empty air. "Interesting," Kettle muttered, his face lighting up with intrigue. "You're pretty quick." Kine gulped as he barely escaped. If his reflexes had been even slightly slower, Kettle would have caught him. This is absurd, Kine thought. Kettle had bypassed Kine's sensory detection with ease. That alone was astonishing, but something even more shocking gnawed at Kine. I couldn't sense any aura. As a swordmaster, he could naturally perceive the flow of mana used by his opponent. Yet, Kettle emitted none, nor could he detect any trace of mana from Kettle. That could only mean one thing. He's moving that fast using only his physical body, Kine wondered. Before he could fully process this revelation, Kettle fixed him with a look of pure excitement. "This is getting fun," Kettle murmured. Kine felt a chill run down his spine. "I have to give it everything I've got." This was no time for testing. Kine sharpened his senses to their utmost, prepared to detect even the faintest movements, like the flutter of a fly's wings. Kettle moved again, vanishing as his foot hit the ground. With the heightened perception, Kine managed to track Kettle's movement this time. That was how he realized, almost too late, that Kettle had grabbed his arm. What? Even though Kine saw it coming and that his arm was the target, he couldn't react in time. Kettle twisted his arm. It wasn't just a sensation of being grabbed. It felt as though his arm had been pinned to solid rock, and now that rock was dragging his entire body forward. The sheer force was incomprehensible. Arg! Kine quickly focused his mana into his arm. The raw, overwhelming strength holding him surpassed the limits of human capability. He tried to break free with all his might. However, it was futile. No matter how much effort a human exerted, it was like trying to hold back a tsunami. The hand gripping Kine's arm was utterly unaffected. What kind of strength is this? Kine thought. It wasn't even a contest. Kine gritted his teeth. Whoosh. Mana surged from within Kine, manifesting into the physical world. His arm, caught in Kettle's grip, began to glow with a faint bluish light. Even in the pitch-black darkness, the mysterious glow emanating from his arm was clearly visible. Oh, Kettle widened his eyes, intrigued. The bluish energy seemed to slip through Kettle's grasp like slick oil, allowing Kine to wrench his arm free. Ha! Kine panted heavily, putting some distance between them while expanding his senses to the limit. Kettle briefly glanced at his hand, then nodded in approval. These days, even bandits have impressive tricks up their sleeves. Bandits, what nonsense is he spouting now? Kine thought. He was utterly exasperated. What he had just done was the manifestation of mana, enveloping his body with it. This was a feat achievable only by those at the pinnacle of their field. Someone at such a high level would never stoop to something as petty as banditry. Yet, Kettle seemed genuinely convinced that this was some kind of bandit trick. Kine stared incredulously at Kettle's arm, the same one that had gripped him moments ago. His mana manifestation had been reflexive. Normally, manifested mana could tear through even the hardest steel like paper. Something as soft as human flesh would have disintegrated on contact. Yet Kettle's arm was perfectly fine, not even a scratch marring his skin. This realization left Kine even more bewildered. What kind of body is this? The fact that even manifested mana couldn't harm Kettle's bare skin made Kine want to laugh in disbelief. You use some interesting tricks, but they're not that impressive, Kettle remarked casually. Let's wrap this up. With that declaration, Kettle prepared to make good on his words. He moved again, faster than Kine could fully perceive, closing the gap in an instant. Kine's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword. His earlier resolve to test Kettle without drawing his weapon was long gone. The only thought that consumed him now was that failing to unsheath his sword would lead to his downfall. However, that decision came far too late. Kine should have drawn the sword the moment he first saw Kettle. Cluck. Kettle's hand pressed lightly against the pommel of Kine's sword. That was all it took to prevent him from drawing it. Kine struggled to resist, but the last thing he saw was Kettle's hand descending toward his head. Then everything went black. Kettle grabbed the unconscious Kine and stood quietly, marveling at the situation. So this is what bandits are like in a fantasy world. Even a mere thief possessed such strange techniques. It truly was a fantasy world. If one couldn't manage at least this level of skill, they wouldn't survive as a bandit here. He is stronger than that knight I fought earlier. This is the true strength of bandits in this fantasy world. Kettle felt thoroughly satisfied. In hindsight, everything that had happened was strange, but he was fully prepared to accept anything in this fantasy world. He lifted Kine's limp body, ensuring his strength was controlled enough to have only knocked him unconscious. Well then, he decided to deal with him the next day. Dragging Kine, he returned to his lodging. What's going on? The guard commander felt as if he were dreaming. Before him stood the extraordinary swordmaster, a transcendent who had reached the pinnacle of human capability, Kine the swordmaster. Yet this exalted figure was being held captive by a barbarian. Not just captured, he was suspended midair in an utterly humiliating position, with the barbarian gripping the back of his neck. To make matters worse, the barbarian was accusing the swordmaster of being a bandit. The guard commander's mind blanked. He didn't know what to say in such a bizarre situation. With great effort, he forced his lips to move. That man is not a bandit. Huh, Kettle looked puzzled. So you know him, a criminal acquaintance perhaps. If he is not a bandit, is he a pickpocket? Never mind. The guard commander gave up on explaining. Instead, he assumed a posture befitting the occasion. Standing straight, he bowed deeply. This was a gesture of respect reserved for those who transcended human limits. I greet you, Sir Kine, the only swordmaster of the kingdom of Jehantra, the one who has reached the apex of the blades, the guard commander said. Huh! At those words, the expressions of both the barbarian and the swordmaster shifted. Kine's face twisted further in humiliation. The guard commander realized his blunder. Kine hadn't revealed his identity as a swordmaster. A swordmaster, you say? Kettle looked genuinely flustered. The title carried immense weight. Kettle could not believe that this man he was holding was supposed to be a swordmaster. He was the same person Kettle had accused of being a bandit just a moment ago. That can't be. This man is a bandit. He ambushed me to steal my silver coins, Kettle shouted. No, he is a swordmaster. I wouldn't mistake his face for someone else. I even recall him promising to visit this estate, the guard commander explained. Perhaps he is a mage skilled enough to alter his appearance. Magic capable of disguising one's entire physique to such perfection. If he were such a high-level mage, he'd be revered as much as the swordmaster. Then, maybe swordmaster is just another term for bandit. What nonsense are you talking about? It was then that Kettle understood. He's really a swordmaster. Yes, the guard commander replied. ch15. With an expression that was both bewildered and resigned, Kettle finally released his grip. As soon as his feet touched the ground, Kine straightened his clothing. The entire scene had felt like a surreal dream. The guard commander, who had been watching in a daze, snapped back to his senses. This was a situation far beyond his ability to resolve. I will report this to the Lord. Please wait here for a moment. With that, he hurried off, moving so fast it was as if he couldn't bear to remain there any longer. A sharp pain throbbed in his temples as he ran toward the Lord's castle. Somehow, he had a dreadful feeling that as long as that barbarian remained, his headaches would never cease. Sweating profusely, the guard commander relayed the story to Lord Barkan, who sprang to his feet in shock. Rushing to the scene, Lord Barkan arrived to witness the barbarian and the swordmaster standing before him, his expression frozen in astonishment. Without delay, he led them back to the reception room and desperately attempted to explain the situation to the still confused barbarian. I see, Kettle finally said, realization dawning upon him. He now fully believed that the man was indeed a swordmaster. Speaking carefully, he added, I apologize, I should have listened until the end. No, it's not your fault, Kine replied awkwardly. I should have explained myself earlier. The swordmaster and the barbarian exchanged hesitant words, their discomfort evident. Watching them, Lord Barkan felt a headache creeping in. Kine lost, Lord Barkan thought. The Lord, who had known Kine for a long time, could roughly predict his actions. He had guessed that Kine would seek out the barbarian for a duel, but he had never anticipated Kine losing. Kine had been defeated by a barbarian. The details were unclear, but one fact was undeniable. Kettle was stronger than the swordmaster. Of course, even among swordmasters, there were varying degrees of skill. Kine had only recently reached that level, and among transcendents, his abilities were likely still developing. Yet he was still a swordmaster, a bearer of the title that represented mastery of the blade. For someone to defeat such a figure, a barbarian no less, was unthinkable. It meant this barbarian was an uncontrollable force. Every calculation and contingency Lord Barkan had considered shattered under the weight of this realization. The headache he had been suppressing became unbearable. It seems there was a misunderstanding. I will leave you two to talk things out, Lord Barkan said, standing up. Neither Kettle nor Kine stopped him. Once the reception room door closed, only the barbarian and the swordmaster remained. Kettle looked at Kine with a mixed expression of awkwardness and curiosity. A swordmaster, Kettle thought. He was the master of the blade, one who had reached the pinnacle of swordsmanship. Such figures were a staple in fantasy worlds, symbols of unparalleled strength. Kettle had often imagined what such individuals might be like during his time in the white snowfield. He thought about what weapons they would wield, what mysterious powers they would command, and just how strong they could be. But this was not what he had expected. Kettle was very disappointed. Kine could sense the thoughts reflected in Kettle's gaze. Though deeply humiliating, he couldn't deny them. He had lost, and not just barely. His defeat had been absolute. Beyond the blow of his pride, his spirit felt as tattered as a discarded rag. Let me properly introduce myself. I am Kine the Swordmaster. Now regaining his composure, Kine asked with genuine curiosity, Is Swordmaster your surname? When one ascends to the rank of Swordmaster, human family names no longer matter, Kine explained. It was a tradition born of respect for those who transcended human limitations, a recognition that their lineage could no longer bind them. However, after getting defeated by the barbarian, Kine realized these formalities didn't matter. Kine lowered his head in gloom, while Kettle gradually recovered his enthusiasm. Though their meeting had been unconventional, Kettle found himself intrigued. He had always dreamed of meeting someone like this. As Kettle's curiosity grew, Kine began speaking again. I must apologize once more. There's no need, Kettle replied. As I said, I should have listened to the whole story, but why did you follow me? I heard rumors of a barbarian who emerged from the white snowfield, Kine admitted. Ah, Kettle said. He now understood that Kine had come to test him. Were you satisfied with the results? More than enough, Kine replied with a bitter smile. Far more than I expected. You truly are a being of the demon realm. I thought I understood that place well, but it turns out I was mistaken. Kine's words stirred Kettle's curiosity even further. The mention of the demon realm piqued his interest, especially as it aligned with the strange locations he had read about in the library, including the white snowfield. Before Kettle could ask more, Kine spoke again. What do you think of us? Kettle immediately grasped the question's intent and shook his head. I have no plans to do anything. I am simply enjoying my journey. It may be hard to believe, but I have no reason to lie. I believe you, Kine replied. If you wanted me dead, you would have killed me already. Kettle's choice to subdue rather than kill him had spoken volumes. The tension between them began to ease. Looking at Kine, Kettle felt his curiosity grow even stronger. He asked, Was what you showed me earlier also a swordmaster's technique? This, Kine raised his arm, allowing a bluish glow to envelop it entirely. Wow, Kettle exclaimed in awe. Earlier, he had dismissed it as a mere bandit's trick, but now that he knew it was a swordmaster's ability, his interest soared. This is the manifestation of mist. It is also known as aura, Kine said. Aura, Kettle's eyes sparkled. So that's what aura is. Why, yes, that's correct, Kine stammered, caught off guard by the sudden shift in Kettle's attitude. The barbarian, who had seemed monstrous during their fight, now resembled an excited child. How does one do that? Kettle asked eagerly. Well, essentially, it involves controlling mist to manifest it, Kine explained. Mist, what is that? Is it like mana? Kettle probed further. No, mana belongs to mages. Mist is the fundamental unit of the world. Whether it's used as aura or mana depends on the wider. Knights and mages simply take different approaches, Kine said. So, mages and knights both manipulate mist, but in different ways. Kettle exclaimed with a bright smile, his earlier ferocity entirely gone. Kine felt a mix of awkwardness and obligation under Kettle's enthusiastic gaze. The barbarian's excitement was contagious. Finally, Kettle couldn't hold back any longer. Can you teach me how to do that? What? Forgive my ignorance, but I am still gathering knowledge. You, however, are a swordmaster, someone who has reached the pinnacle of swordsmanship. Surely you've taught others before, Kettle pressed. Well, yes, I have, Kine hesitated. He had trained the knight who had ultimately been defeated by Kettle. The barbarian bowed his head sincerely. Please, teach me. Kine faltered. I mean, it's not that impressive, but I suppose I could. However, it was more impressive than Kine made it out to be. Countless people would offer fortunes for the opportunity to be taught by a swordmaster. You're stronger than me. Why would you seek my guidance? Kine asked, puzzled. The barbarian standing before him was undoubtedly far more powerful than him. It was peculiar for someone so strong to seek instruction from someone weaker. Kettle shook his head. Embarrassingly, I know nothing about mist or swordsmanship you speak of. I only swing my weapon around mindlessly. Is that so? Kine said, a flicker of relief stirring within him. The fragments of his shattered pride began to piece themselves back together. He was a swordmaster. Being strong wasn't just about raw strength. He had attained the pinnacle of swordsmanship. Even if Kettle was physically stronger, that did not diminish Kine's mastery of the blade. That's right, I didn't even draw my sword, Kine thought. During the fight with Kettle, Kine had blacked out while still gripping the hilt of his weapon. Though the defeat was undeniable, it hadn't been a full demonstration of his power. To teach this barbarian swordsmanship, to display the greatness of the blade, this would surely restore his broken self-esteem. With a newfound resolve, Kine made his decision. Very well, he said, nodding. I am a swordsman, a swordmaster, one who has reached the pinnacle of the blade. Without my sword, I am but a cripple. Oh, that explains it, Kettle exclaimed. I thought you were too weak, but it was because you couldn't use your sword. Why, yes, exactly that. Of course, you really were absurdly weak. For someone like that to be called a swordmaster, it made no sense. But if you had wielded your sword, perhaps you could have one. I wasn't that weak, Kine muttered, his voice faltering. He wondered if he could have defeated Kettle even with his sword. The thought didn't fill him with confidence. But with Kettle's eyes gleaming like a child, Kine found himself unable to say no to the barbarian outright. Will this really help me restore my self-esteem? Kine wondered. Instead, a chilling doubt crept into his mind. What if this only shatters me even further? The thought gnawed at him as the conversation moved forward. Kine first approached Lord Barkan to explain his intentions. He stated that he would teach Kettle about swordsmanship and the concept of aura. The Lord's expression became even more perplexed, but perhaps having resigned himself to the situation, he nodded with a small sigh. Kine and Kettle then moved to the training ground. It's better to start by explaining my swordsmanship. I am Kine the swordmaster. My technique is the swordsmanship of Kine. Swordsmanship of Kine, is that your school of thought? Kettle asked, intrigued. The swordsmanship I use is my own creation. No one can reach the level of a swordmaster using another's technique. Kine's tone was calm, as though he were merely stating facts. Kettle's excitement grew at that demeanor. It implied that Kine was the founder of his own style. Kettle was here to learn the mysteries of the world. Although he had learned basic swordsmanship on Earth, it was merely for health, as most parents encouraged during childhood. It wasn't anything serious. However, this was true swordsmanship, a mystical fantasy swordsmanship that utilized aura. Kettle's heart raced like an eager child. The thought of experiencing genuine fantasy swordsmanship thrilled him to the point he could barely stay still. Kine unsheathed his sword slowly. The defining characteristic of my swordsmanship is the materialization of the real and the false. I understand you faced one of my disciples. Ah, so that knight was your student? Kettle asked him. Yes, I've heard a bit about the duel. What did you observe? I saw that his sword strikes split into 3. All of them were real attacks. It was astonishing. For most, it would be difficult to deal with such a technique. However, Kettle had already grasped the essence of Kine's swordsmanship. So that's what you mean by materialization. It's a technique that prioritizes skill over raw power. Yes, Kine nodded, though his expression remained subdued. He was impressed by how quickly Kettle understood. He's quick to comprehend. His insight was sharper than most well-educated individuals Kine had met. He couldn't quite discern the nature of the barbarian before him. After a brief pause to gather his thoughts, he continued, "Swordsmanship is the combination of the sword and aura, wielding the mist they create. Those who master it are called swordmasters." Kine emphasized his words, and Kettle stared at him, his heart still pounding. With a crackling sound, a bluish flame engulfed Kine's sword. It looked as though the blade was consumed by blue fire. "Whoa," Kettle couldn't suppress his amazement. "That's aura. The aura is enveloping the sword." Kettle had always yearned to witness something this fantastical from the world. Tears almost welled up in his eyes. Kine, on the other hand, was taken aback by Kettle's reaction. Why is he acting like this? Kine thought. Coating a sword in aura was a basic skill. Any advanced swordsman could do it. It was certainly not something that should have impressed someone strong enough to overpower him earlier. Bewildered, Kine waved his sword. "You probably can't fully grasp what I mean by the materialization of the real and the false. Let me show you." Gripping his sword with both hands, Kine brought it down in a sweeping strike. The blue flame sliced through the air. In an instant, the sword seemed to split, 2 strikes to the left and 2 to the right. A total of 5 simultaneous sword strikes manifested, cutting sharply through the air and converging on a single point. "Whoa!" Kettle's pure admiration burst forth. 5 strikes materialized simultaneously. It was clearly a phenomenon impossible to achieve with modern knowledge, a genuine mystery. Kine enjoyed Kettle's reaction as he sheathed his sword. There are many techniques that create illusions using aura, but embedding substance into them is unique to my swordsmanship. Manipulating the real and the false to disrupt perception, few could counter such a technique. It was the foundation of Kine's rise to the title of swordmaster. "I will teach you the specifics shortly," Kine said. Whoa! At last, Kettle felt he was about to learn about the mist. His gratitude ran deep, and Kine appeared quite satisfied. Yes, I am a swordmaster, Kine thought. Even if this barbarian was stronger than him, the realm he had reached was lofty and unparalleled. No one could replicate it. He was certain of that. Oh, however, Kettle's expression gradually shifted to one of confusion, and he tilted his head. "The technique you demonstrated." "Yes, this is the swordsmanship using mist. What do you think?" Kine asked him. "I feel like I could do it too." "What?" Kine froze. "What nonsense are you spouting?" Kine's face showed a hint of irritation. He had dedicated his life to the sword, pouring his talent and relentless effort into his craft. The result was his unique swordsmanship. To hear that a barbarian thought he could replicate it was unacceptable. "Let me show you," Kettle said, grasping the handle of his axe. Only then did Kine notice the weapon in Kettle's hands. That axe, Kine's eyes widened as he examined the axe. The black gem embedded at the end of the handle, the entirely black shaft and blade, and the ornate carvings along the bandle all suggested it was no ordinary weapon. The axe's ominously gleaming blade seemed capable of splitting the world itself. On the joint between the blade and the handle was a peculiar symbol. What is that? Kine thought. The emblem seemed to represent something, though Kine couldn't discern what. The intricacy made it clear that this was no ordinary axe. It was too civilized and expensive for a barbarian to have. It looks like a weapon from myth, Kine thought. Before he could ponder further, Kettle raised the axe and flexed his muscles. His muscles bulged as he brought the axe down. Kine watched in disbelief as Kettle performed a series of strikes. 1 forward, 2 to the left, and 2 to the right. A total of 5 axe strikes landed simultaneously, accompanied by a blast of air that tore through the ground, raising a cloud of dust. Kettle calmly sheathed his axe. "What do you think?" Kine was at a loss for words. Kettle had reproduced Kine's 5 simultaneous attacks, but there was a significant difference. He did it with brute force. Kine screamed internally. Kettle hadn't used aura to manipulate reality and illusion. He had simply swung his axe downward, then quickly recovered to strike twice on each side. The sheer speed made it appear simultaneous. What kind of absurd method is this? He achieved the 5 strikes with nothing but strength and speed. It was unheard of. Struggling to form words, Kine finally managed to speak. What you did was merely swinging your axe. There was no technique. But the result is the same. Swordsmanship isn't for show, it's for real combat. Isn't that what matters? That's... Kine couldn't refute the point. Swordsmanship was ultimately about combat and killing. From that perspective, Kettle's words held merit. Yet, accepting that the mist he had painstakingly cultivated could be overcome by brute force alone was something he couldn't stomach. Then how about this? Kine retorted. Gripping his sword once more, he channeled his aura. It surged widely, responding to his rising emotions. Kine went all out. With a powerful advance, he swung his sword. This time, it wasn't just his blade that multiplied. His entire body split into 7. He was one entity, yet not one. It was a miracle born from mastering aura to its utmost limit. It was as if a coordinated group launched a storm-like barrage of attacks in perfect unison. To face him now would feel like fighting 7 opponents simultaneously. Try to imitate this, Kine shouted, breathing heavily from the exertion. Without a word, Kettle gripped his axe, and then he swung. The resulting storm was fiercer than anything Kine had produced. It became almost impossible to keep one's eyes open amidst the chaotic gale. However, Kettle's technique was entirely different from Kine's. It wasn't the delicate manipulation of aura to turn afterimages into reality. It was simply speed, pure, unadulterated speed that created afterimages due to its intensity. Kine stared in shock as Kettle's movements produced not 7, but 8 simultaneous afterimages. Rumble. As the storm settled, Kettle sheathed his axe calmly. Well, what do you think? Ah, Kine stammered, unable to find the words. Kine's lifelong efforts, his pride, the mist he believed no one else could replicate, had been shattered in the simplest, most brutish way possible. He couldn't bring himself to speak, and Kettle looked equally disheartened. This is not how I wanted things to turn out, Kettle thought, his expression clouded. He had simply swung his axe rapidly. That alone had achieved the same effect as Kine's cherished technique. However, this wasn't a mist or anything special. It was as if a child had seen behind the curtains of a magic show. Kettle's awe for the mist had been extinguished. No, I shouldn't think like that. Kettle shook his head. He endured so much. He had faced death hundreds, thousands of times. The span of his experiences dwarfed the lifetime of any ordinary human. His strength, obtained through relentless struggle, was devoid of aura, mana, or miracles. It was pure, raw power, but it was undeniably overwhelming. And the swordmaster before him had used his unique techniques to reach such heights. Kine's age was unclear, but judging by his appearance, he had honed his skills for more than 40 or 50 years. To think Kine had achieved so much in such a comparatively short time was nothing short of astounding. It only heightened Kettle's respect for the value of the mist. Most importantly, what Kettle had witnessed was only a single technique. There was so much more he wished to learn: magic, more swordsmanship, summoning spirits, alchemy, miracles, divine power, prayers. He yearned to understand and acquire them all. He thought of how the Elven Queen displayed mysterious abilities, with spirits that he could never replicate. Judging Kine's worth based on one technique alone would be no different from a frog believing the well it lived in was the entire world. Resolute, Kettle quickly recovered his emotions. Kine, however, was still struggling to regain his composure. Azza, Kine muttered incoherently, his mouth hanging open. Uzha. Hey, Kine, snap out of it. Kettle waved his hand in front of Kine's face, but there was no sign that his mind was returning to reality. Kine just stood there, staring blankly with his mouth slightly open, lost in his own world. A single tear pooled in his eye, as if he were overwhelmed by sorrow. This can't be happening, Kine thought. He reflected on the sheer amount of time and effort it had taken to teach his level. He had abandoned everything except the sword. his loving parents' affection, his fiancée's love. He sacrificed it all, devoting his life entirely to mastering the blade. And yet that technique, his ultimate mastery, had just been shattered. It wasn't by some otherworldly skill, but by raw physical force alone. What am I? The cries of his family, begging him to give up the sword and stay with them, echoed in his ears. His fiancée's lament and curses, asking if she meant less to him than a mere blade, resurfaced vividly in his mind. Every painful memory flashed through his head like a reel of film. Kettle stroked his chin, observing Kine thoughtfully. His mental resilience is weaker than I expected. He had assumed that being a swordmaster meant Kine's mind would be as unyielding as his skills, but apparently not. Then again, strength did not necessarily correlate with mental fortitude. After all, many strong individuals in this fantasy world had fragile psyches. Kettle stored that information in his mind for later, planning to jot it down in his notebook. Of course, Kettle was mistaken. A swordsman at Kine's level would usually possess mental strength befitting his process. The only reason his mind had shattered so thoroughly was because Kettle himself was an anomaly, a presence so alien that it crushed even the strongest of wills. Unaware of this, Kettle continued trying to snap Kine out of his stupor. However, his spirit had been completely broken. Simple external stimulus wouldn't be enough. Kettle had seen this kind of breakdown before. The barbarians he fought alongside sometimes displayed a similar state of madness. While their methods differed, they too often discarded reason, surrendering to pure instinct and wildly swinging their weapons. Those types didn't regain their senses until they were utterly subdued, infuriating adversaries, to say the least. And Kettle knew the fastest way to bring such people back to their senses. He fixed his gaze on Kine and made up his mind. I'm going to kill you, Kettle thought. The sheer intent to kill materialized, surging toward Kine like a physical force. Boom! An explosion occurred. Kine reacted instinctively. He drew his sword, enveloping his entire self in aura as a defensive shield, and leaped backward, putting dozens of steps between himself and Kettle. Cold sweat trickled down his face. Are you awake now? Kettle asked, his tone casual. What did you just do? Kine stammered. You seemed half out of it, so I woke you up. Seems like it worked perfectly, Kettle replied with a satisfied nod. Kine's heart pounded in his chest. Just now, he had truly felt the presence of death. It wasn't a metaphor or exaggeration. Death itself had brushed against the back of his neck. The fear of that moment brought his shattered mind back together. It was an experience he never wanted to endure again. Kettle spoke calmly. Your swordsmanship is incredible. What? Kine asked, still shaken. All I did was swing my axe quickly. That's it. I could never hope to match the divine technique you demonstrated. Kettle swung his axe in a blur, creating faint afterimages. While it was impressively fast, it wasn't truly simultaneous. It depended on whether the opponent could block the initial strike to generate the illusion. Kine's swordsmanship, however, was on a completely different level. Each of his strikes occurred simultaneously in all directions, forcing opponents to block every attack. It was a godlike feat. Kettle's words began to heal the cracks in Kine's spirits. Gradually, light returned to his eyes. That's right, Kine thought. His swordsmanship wasn't worthless. His unique ability to manifest both emptiness and substance in perfect harmony was something no one else in the world could achieve. Even if it had been partially broken, that didn't diminish its value. Kine pushed away the creeping despair, forcing himself to regain focus. No, it's not me. It's the barbarian who's insane. What kind of lunatic could move fast enough to create tangible afterimages without even using aura? Such a feat was beyond the realm of humanity. Kettle was simply an outlier, an existence far removed from the norm. Kine convinced himself that Kettle was just an exception, safeguarding his mental state. I apologize. I let my emotions get the better of me, Kine said, bowing slightly. It's fine. This has been quite entertaining for me. I apologize if I came across as childish, Kettle replied, a curious smile on his face. Despite his words, the outcomes of their clash couldn't have been more different when examined closely. Once Kettle masters aura, he would be capable of techniques like that as well. It would allow him to launch simultaneous attacks in the truest senses of the word. Kine cleared his throat, organizing his thoughts. Well, let's continue. The important thing in the end is the ability to sense and wield aura. You're talking about the mist, right? Kettle asked. This was the world's most critical secret. Kettle bared his teeth as Kine began to explain slowly. Mist is the foundational element of this world. No mage, swordsman, or witch can reach the pinnacle of their craft without first understanding mist. And the only ones who can truly grasp it are those who have faith in the gods. So divine power is a separate matter? Kettle asked. Yes, miracles come directly from the gods and have no real connection to personal ability. What about paladins? Their power stems from their faith in themselves. It's a difference of approach. The same goes for elementalists. While different in focus, the cornerstone remained the same. Mist. Mastering it was the first step. For now, I will explain the basic concepts and levels. Let me know if it gets too dull, Kine said. No, please continue, Kettle said, shaking his head. A discussion of mist, the very thing he had longed to understand, could never bore him. Then let's start with mist itself. As the name suggests, it's the enigmatic power inherent within oneself. How you control it determines everything. Fascinating. Mist was the fundamental unit of this world. To wield aura, harness mana, or interact with elemental spirits, every kind of fantasy power required an understanding of mist as the starting point. There are 5 stages: detection, control, manifestation, domination, and finally, visualization, Kine continued. The most basic stage is the detection of mist. It involves recognizing, understanding, and sensing it. While it doesn't yet allow for active control, it marks the first step toward the height of mastery. Can anyone sense mist? Kettle asked. No, only those with talent can even begin to perceive it. Those who achieve this level are referred to as the novice. To sense mist was to qualify as novice. Kettle recalled something the thief from the first dungeon had said. There are 5 tiers: novice, intermediate, advanced, transcendent, and hero. And where do you all stand? We don't even qualify as novice. Even novice warriors are considered strong. Achieving that rank isn't easy. His party members admitted they were below novice, essentially incapable of sensing mist. The next stage is the control of mist. This is the level where you can harness mist and use it actively. From this point, various powers can be wielded, Kine said. He swung his arm, and the air exploded with force. His movements were beyond what the eye could follow. At this stage, basic physical enhancement becomes possible. Impressive. This is where one can call themselves intermediate. For those who have reached this stage, it's almost impossible to lose someone who hasn't. Kine hesitated for a moment and glanced at Kettle, who stared blankly. Well, there are exceptions, but most wouldn't stand a chance. Next is the manifestation of mist. Simply put, it looks like this. Kine raised his sword, and a bluish light flickered along its edge. Kettle let out an exclamation of awe. Ooh. Why is he so impressed by this? Kine thought, feeling awkward. Manifestation was certainly a high-level technique, but it wasn't something that warranted such wonder. Still, he pressed on with his explanation. This is the advanced level, the manifestation of mist. At this stage, mist can take tangible forms like aura or mana. Those at this level are recognized as true knights, mages, or elementalists. Aura could tear through steel as though it were soft cheese. It could cut through solid fortress walls effortlessly. Mages at this level could summon massive flames or scatter blades of ice. Reaching the level of manifestation effectively turned someone into a lethal weapon. And then comes domination, Kine said. Domination was the ability to go beyond controlling and manifesting mist, to command it absolutely and wield it at will. This is the level of the transcendent. It's where I stand. So swordsmasters are transcendents? Kettle asked. There are exceptions, but generally, yes. To become transcendent, was to earn universal reverence. At this level, one transcendent limits to the point that societal status became irrelevant. Transcendence. The term describes those who have stepped out of the bounds of humanity, Kine explained. Kettle's eyes gleamed. So there are people stronger than you then. There was only one level remaining. Kine nodded, then continued to speak. The final stage is the visualization of mist. Those who can dominate mist so completely that they influence the very concept of the world itself. That is the hero class. Are they stronger than you? Kettle asked. Immeasurably so, Kine answered without hesitation. There was no shame or humiliation in his expression, only a calm acknowledgement of truth. I may be strong, but there are many at my level. Heroes, however, are few and far between. They are monsters. Kine's face showed a mix of awe and fear that he couldn't hide. Fascinating, Kettle murmured, his interest piqued. He wondered how strong these heroes could be and what sort of incredible mists they wielded. I'd like to see for myself someday, Kettle thought, his curiosity burning intensely. Is this barbarian planning to challenge a hero? Kine thought. A shiver ran down his spine, and he quickly redirected the conversation. These classifications are ultimately just for convenience. There's significant variance even within each level, and they don't define things perfectly. Think of them as general guidelines. Understood. However, that was a matter for the future. For now, the mist before him was what mattered most for Kettle. Kine spoke again. Let's begin, the first stage, detecting mist. Finally, the moment had come to truly embrace the mist of the world and wield the fantastical powers within his body. Kettle could barely contain his excitement. He felt an overwhelming urge to shout with joy. However, being a reasonable person, he held back, channeling his exhilaration into a quiet act instead. He stomped his foot lightly. Boom! The training grounds quaked, and the vibrations spread throughout the estate. People screamed and crouched down, mistaking the tremors for an earthquake. Kine, startled, shouted in alarm. What are you doing? Oh, I was just happy. I lost control of my emotions for a moment. My apologies, Kettle replied, his tone calm despite the situation. I see, Kine stammered, still shaken. For a mere stomp to cause tremors resembling an earthquake was absurd. Kine stared at the barbarian with a pale expression, unable to fully grasp the power in front of him. In any case, once you've mastered mist, does it mean you're locked into one path? Can you not become a swordsman while using magic? Kettle asked. Using aura and mana simultaneously isn't possible, Kine responded as he shook his head. Mist is the fundamental unit of this world. How you wield it depends on your abilities, but that also sets a limit. If you choose to channel mist as aura, you will have to rely on aura all the way to the end. Ah, I see, Kettle murmured, nodding in understanding. Unfortunately, it seemed one's path was predetermined by their initial choice. Even so, Kettle's enthusiasm didn't waver. He began to wonder which path would suit him. He wondered if he would wield aura, enhancing his physical body as a knight and charging fearlessly into battle, or wield mana, the true embodiment of fantasy's allure. Magic had always held a special charm, and he had longed to experience it. No matter the direction, the possibilities excited him greatly. No, get comfortable, Kine said. Of course, Kettle replied, grinning widely as he sat down cross-legged. Kine tilted his head in confusion as he observed Kettle's posture. What kind of posture is that? You don't know it. It's the first time I've seen it. It's fascinating but looks uncomfortable. Are you sure you're fine? He doesn't know the cross-legged position? Kettle thought. He realized that it wasn't surprising. After all, the posture originated from Buddhist practices. It would have been stranger if people in this world were familiar with it. This is a posture for concentration. It's fairly comfortable, so you don't need to worry, Kettle said. If you say so, then close your eyes and focus your mind. Kettle obediently closed his eyes. At last, it was time to begin sensing mist. The journey to truly learning mist had officially started. Suppressing the pounding excitement in his chest, Kettle began to focus his mind, immersing himself in the moment. Feel everything around you, Kine said calmly. To sense mist is to awaken a new sense that you have never experienced before. Expand your perception as much as you can. Following Kine's instruction, Kettle extended his senses. Feel the sensation of the passing wind, Kine instructed. Kettle began to sense the strength and angle of the wind, how it collided with his body, how its trajectory shifted and flowed around him. He noticed it all. The wind brushing against his arms was slightly stronger than elsewhere. He perceived every subtle fluctuation in the gentle breeze. Feel the texture of the earth, Kine instructed again. The floor of the training ground beneath him, pressing against his legs and hips, carried the roughness of countless grains of sand. Kettle discerned the shape of each individual grain. And sense the distinct feeling hidden within. Kettle pushed his senses further outward. An immeasurable flood of information rushed into Kettle's awareness. Kine, observing this, frowned slightly. Kine instinctively stepped back. For a brief moment, he felt as though his entire body had been scanned. He quickly understood why. Is this just from expanding his senses? Kine was stunned. Kettle hadn't used mist to enhance his perception. He had simply expanded his natural senses. Yet, even that was enough to produce a change Kine could distinctly feel. What a monster, Kine thought. He wondered how far the barbarian's perception could extend. Perhaps beyond this estate, reaching the outside world. Even Kine, with the refined senses of a swordmaster, couldn't fully grasp its extent. And yet, despite all this, Kettle couldn't wield mist. The thought alone sent chills down Kine's spine. Moments later, Kettle opened his eyes. I feel nothing. Is that so? Kine replied, hastily regaining his composure. For someone of your strength, I thought you'd sense it easily. Though not an absolute rule, those with exceptional physical strength often had a higher likelihood of sensing mist. Yet, Kettle seemed to be an exception. Is this another peculiarity of the White Snowfield? Kine asked. I wouldn't know. No one around me has ever spoken of something like the mist. The barbarians of the White Snowfield, they're unaware of mana or mist. Kine quickly committed the observation to memory and continued. Well, it's not that unusual. Sensing mist isn't easy, especially for beginners. It's like trying to understand the sensation of flying when you've never had wings. It's nearly impossible. So what's next? Kettle asked eagerly. The next step involves someone who can sense mist channeling their power into you, opening the path. Oh, so you'll transmit aura to me. Something like that. Kettle was visibly moved by the idea. He had always loved fantasy, but his interest extended beyond fantasy. It encompassed all the mysteries of the world. Naturally, he had also read wuxia novels, which often featured masters passing their qi directly to the disciples. This felt like a quintessential wuxia moment, and Kettle couldn't have been more pleased. Well then, let's get to it, he exclaimed. All right, Kine replied, slightly overwhelmed by Kettle's enthusiasm as he cautiously approached. This time, relax your entire body and focus your senses inward. Feel the aura I channel into you. Without a word, Kettle nodded. Kine slowly placed his hand on Kettle's back and froze in shock. What is this body? Kine thought. Kettle's physique was as solid as marble. It felt unyielding, as though any steel weapon striking it would shatter on impact. It was also heavy, not metaphorically, but in the purest sense. The density of his muscles was beyond anything Kine could imagine. Is this even human? Can someone like this truly be categorized as human? Kine, Kettle's voice snapped him out of his daze. Sorry about that. Let's begin. Kine began channeling his aura. Simply transmitting aura wouldn't accomplish anything by itself. The goal was to awaken the dormant mist within Kettle. The key was finding the path. For Kine, this wasn't particularly challenging. As a swordmaster, he was more than capable of discerning the intricacies of the human body. This was why he was more perplexed than expected. What is going on here? Kine thought. He couldn't locate the path of mist within Kettle, or more accurately, he couldn't even reach it. No matter how far he extended his aura, it touched nothing, saw nothing. It was like drifting aimlessly in an open sea. No, it's more than that. It felt less like a vast ocean and more like swimming in the depths of a dark abyss. Nothing was visible, and the crushing pressure made it seem as if he could be crushed at any moment. Kyne withdrew his hand, his expression tense. Kettle titled his head in confusion. Kyne, I didn't feel anything unusual. This is not going to work. What? Kettle's expression shifted drastically, as if his entire world was crumbling. He stared at Kyne with disbelief. What do you mean it's not going to work? Are you saying I have no talent? No, that's not it. It's just... Kyne paused, choosing his words carefully before explaining. Simply transferring aura isn't going to be enough. To awaken mist, you need to stir the dormant power within yourself. I already understand that. Transferring aura was similar to a blood transfusion. It required finding the proper channels within the body to direct the flow. Simply injecting it randomly wouldn't accomplish anything. The same applied to aura. It wasn't just about channeling it, but also about finding the path of mist. Kyne frowned, his tone puzzled. But I can't find your path of mist. Are you saying you can't sense mist at all? Kettle's face hardened, despair threatening to overtake him. But Kyne quickly shook his head. No, that's not it. I couldn't even confirm anything. What do you mean? Your body is different. It's alien. Kyne regarded Kettle with a look that seemed to pierce through him, as though he were an enigma beyond comprehension. To find the path of mist, aura must be deeply infused into the body. But your body, it's too dense, too heavy. The aura can't penetrate properly. This was an entirely new experience for Kyne. Pure physical strength was effectively blocking the flow of aura. So, you're saying you don't know what to do, Kettle clarified. Kyne grasped the meaning behind his words. Finding veins in an overweight person was harder due to fat obstructing the way. In Kettle's case, it wasn't fat but an overwhelming density of muscle, an extreme version of the same concept. At least for me, it's impossible, Kyne replied. Even for a swordmaster, it couldn't be done. Kettle's expression darkened with disappointment. Does that mean I can't awaken the mist within me? I wouldn't say that. I couldn't even confirm if you have the path of mist after all, Kyne replied. He himself didn't know whether the path of mist existed within Kettle. In other words, if someone more skilled in handling aura examined him, Kettle could be able to sense mist. There are others more adept with aura than I am. You could seek out other swordmasters or even visit the Mage Tower. You might also find answers through alchemy. Alchemy, is that a viable option? There have been cases where people used alchemy to artificially awaken mist and ascend to transcendent levels. So yes, it's possible. I see, Kettle replied. It seemed alchemy had significant value in this world. Kettle's face lit up with growing curiosity. Kyne shook his head lightly. In any case, I'm afraid I can't help you. I apologize. It's fine, Kettle replied. He was just happy that there was another way for him to sense the mist. The potential was there, and that was enough for him. Besides, he was already interested in Mage Tower and alchemy. He could save those pursuits for later and look forward to them as future adventures. There was no shortage of things to enjoy. This was the fantasy world he had always dreamed of, a land brimming with mystery and wonder. Then may I ask for one favor? Kettle asked. What is it? Kyne asked, his expression tinged with a hint of guilt. He felt bad for giving Kettle hope only to admit he couldn't deliver. If Kettle asked for something like money, he was ready to oblige. But Kettle's request took him by surprise. Could you explain how aura moves and how it's used in swordsmanship? Kettle asked. I can, but it likely won't mean much to you since you can't wield aura yet. I'd still like to hear it. I want to understand how that power is used. Well, if that's what you want. Kyne nodded reluctantly, his tone hesitant but willing. Kyne began his explanation without much thought. What he explained was simple theory, akin to a professor lecturing on history at an academy, dry and lacking any excitement. Especially since his audience was a barbarian who operated purely on the logic of strength, Kyne was certain Kettle would quickly lose interest. However, Kettle listened intently, as though every word Kine uttered was utterly fascinating. Oh, so controlling aura begins with that kind of foundation. Interesting. I will have to try it out later, Kettle said with genuine enthusiasm. Amused by Kettle's reaction, Kine found himself continuing the explanation. Time passed without notice, and eventually night had fallen. A maid, sent by Lord Barkan, cautiously approached. "Excuse me, Swordmaster, it's getting late," the maid said. "Oh, look at the time," Kine said, glancing at the darkened sky. "Do you have any other appointments?" Kettle inquired. "Yes, I came here on business, but this has taken more time than I expected." "I see." This marked the end of their encounter. Kettle's face reflected a trace of regret. Despite a few unmet expectations, he had thoroughly enjoyed meeting the Swordmaster. "Thank you. I've learned so much from you. You could even say you are my teacher at heart." Kettle had gained knowledge about aura, levels, and control, though not swordsmanship itself. "If anyone asks who my teacher is, I will proudly name you, Kine the Swordmaster." "No, that's not necessary," Kine stammered. The barbarian, who was stronger than most yet unable to wield aura, was willing to call him his teacher. Kine enjoyed enhancing his reputation, but even he understood the danger in Kettle proclaiming him as a master. If Kettle, a monstrous force of nature, went around calling him his teacher, it could invite trouble beyond imagination. "I'd appreciate it if you refrained from that. I haven't taught you enough to deserve such a title," Kine said. If that's what you want," Kettle replied with a slight smile. He decided to only mention Kine as his teacher if directly asked. Watching Kettle so easily accept his request, Kine felt a strange emotion. Every barbarian he had encountered so far had been uncontrollable. They lived for booze, violence, and death, rejecting the concept of negotiation. If they desired something, they took it by force. Even the strongest among them were no exception. That was why barbarians were universally shunned. However, the barbarian in front of him was different. This one was controllable. A barbarian this incomprehensibly strong could be reasoned with. A glint of ambition shone in Kine's eyes. "Have you considered settling down in this land?" Kine asked. "What do you mean?" Kettle replied, his tone curious. "Exactly what I said. Swear loyalty to the kingdom and receive a title. With your strength, you could rise to a prestigious position. I'd personally vouch for you." "That does sound intriguing, but..." Kettle shook his head. "I will have to decline. I have no desire to be bound to anything." "A title would grant you many things. Gold, treasure, women," Kine pressed. "But I'd also belong to the kingdom. I wouldn't be free to act as I wish and would have to follow orders, wouldn't I?" "Well, that's true, but..." Kine hastily continued, his greed plain to see. If he could bring Kettle into the kingdom's fold, it could be enough to free them from the Empire's shadow. His attempt to persuade Kettle was fueled by this ambition. "Even so, you'd gain noble status. Surely that's appealing." Kettle regarded Kine for a moment, noticing his persistence. Then he smiled softly. "I will do as I please." A chill ran down Kine's spine. Though Kettle's words carried no malice, the sheer conviction behind them was overwhelming, leaving Kine no room to argue. He nodded slowly, accepting that this was the best response he could give. "I see. Very well. In any case, thank you. I won't forget this favor." "Think of it as repayment for sparing my life," Kine replied. "Is that so? Then perhaps we will meet again someday." With a broad grin, Kettle saw Kine off. What an absurd thought I had, Kine thought. He was shocked to think he could control a barbarian like that. Kettle was a being who acted solely according to his own will. While he showed consideration for others and could integrate into a group, that was the extent of it. At his core, his actions were entirely on his own. In that sense, Kettle was even more troublesome than other barbarians, whose intentions, while brutal, were at least predictable. The barbarian of the white snowfield, Kine thought. This was the true nature of a being from the demon realm. He sighed deeply. To think we're planning an expedition into the demon realms, what could the Emperor possibly be thinking? "Is that so? Lord Barbin let out a sigh in response to Kine's words. So, the Emperor desires the conquest of the demon realms, you say? Scouting missions are turning into meaningless sacrifices, Kine replied, clicking his tongue in annoyance. Lord Barkan, his face solemn, asked, Are you serious? I am. No one can stop him now. Perhaps he fancies himself the reincarnation of the old emperor. Kine shook his head. A long time ago, the emperor who had claimed dominion over the entire world had ultimately marched to conquer the White Snowfield. There, he faced defeat and death. That legend was widely known to the public. The White Snowfield, Kine murmured. A barbarian from that land resided in this very estate. He smirked bitterly. Well, if anything happens, it's going to happen in the distant future. We haven't even conquered all human territories yet. The White Snowfield is the largest and most mysterious one of the demon realms. It's still a long way to go, but... You mean to say it's only a matter of time, Lord Barkan said. Exactly. This estate is part of the Empire as well, so a summons could come at any time. I thought it best to give you advance warning. Kine leaned back against the sofa, rubbing his temple as if dealing with a headache. The world is strange enough as it is, and now the Emperor has half lost his mind. It's maddening. Are the rumors true? They are. The movements of the demons are becoming noticeable, one by one. The frequency of dungeons appearing is irregular. There's even talk that the anomalies of the demon realms are seeping outside. While nothing is confirmed, the rumors persist. Something was happening to the world, and it didn't bode well for humanity. Kine had come to the Barkan estate to deliver this warning. After all, this was his hometown. Seemingly recalling something, he let out a bitter laugh. Well, if you think about it, the strangest thing is already here. You're right. They were talking about the barbarian from the White Snowfield, a human who had emerged from the oldest and largest demon realm. Kettle was here. What do you think of him? Kine asked. I don't know, Lord Barkan admitted honestly. He isn't hostile towards us. Beyond that, I can't say. What about you, Kine? I think the same. He is very considerate of others. If left alone, he shouldn't pose a problem. Kine gulped. The smile Kettle had shown him at the end of their encounter still sent shivers down his spine. Is he just playing with us? Kine thought. Though considerate and obedient to order, Kettle was not one to suppress his will. I guess if we let the beast alone, he won't go on a rampage, Kine muttered under his breath. George was a farmer, and it was that time of year to harvest the fruits of his labor. But there was simply too much for one man to handle alone. That was why he hired mercenaries. Every year, George brought in mercenaries to help with the harvest. They were loud, rude, and crass, but they got the job done. Their cheap rates ensured he'd never regretted the decision until this year. Are we harvesting potatoes? Why, yes, George stammered as he replied. Before him stood a man whose arms were larger than his torso. His muscles, carved like a statue, bulged beneath what looked like a leather vest. Kettle stood before him. Ah, the barbarian, George thought. He had heard the rumors. A freakishly large barbarian had been spotted in the estate. But as a simple farmer, he had thought it wouldn't concern him. Never in his wildest dreams had he expected that barbarian to respond to his harvest request. George trembled as he shuffled his feet. This way, please. He led Kettle to the potato field. Kettle surveyed the vast expanse and muttered, so big. The field stretched out endlessly, so much so that it would take more than a day to harvest everything, even with constant effort. George forced an awkward smile and said, If it looks like too much, please feel free to rest. I can manage on my own. Usually, George would yell at the complaining mercenaries, cursing and barking orders for them to dig up the potatoes immediately. That was the best way to deal with their brutish attitude. However, he couldn't bring himself to act that way toward Kettle. He feared that a single shouted word might result in his spine being snapped in half. Kettle shook his head. No, I've taken the request, and I intend to fulfill it. I see. Still, digging them up one by one seems inefficient. Kettle stroked his chin, his gaze fixed on the field. As George watched nervously, Kettle lifted his massive foot. Boom. When his foot slammed down, a thunderous crash reverberated. For a split second, George thought an earthquake had struck. However, the tremor was confined solely to the potato field. Dirt flew in every direction, and potato leaves scattered into the air. George's face turned ghostly pale. "What in the world?" George shouted. "There, the prep work is done. Now we just need to harvest them," Kettle declared as he crouched and began picking up potatoes one by one. At that moment, George realized something astonishing. Wait. Harvesting potatoes was backbreaking labor. Since the potatoes were buried deep in the earth, the process involved digging up the hard soil and carefully extracting each potato. Many farmers ended up with sore backs, or worse, after a full day of work. But now it was as though the field had been plowed overnight. The entire field had been overturned, and potatoes lay scattered on the surface, ready to be collected. There was no need to dig. All that was left to do was pick them up. What just happened?" George stammered. "Has that barbarian done this?" With just a single stomp of his foot, Kettle had managed to upheave the entire field. A shiver ran down George's spine. Cold sweat trickled down his back. Kettle, still gathering potatoes, tilted his head in confusion. "Are you all right? You don't look well." "I am fine. Let me help." "You're the client. You can leave this to me." "No, really, I will help you," George shouted desperately as he hastily began tossing potatoes into a basket. The harvest was completed at a speed several times faster than any year before, but George resolved never to hire Kettle again. "The job is done," Kettle said. "Yes, I received a message from George. As always, you're incredibly fast." Rosa stared at Kettle with awe. Harvesting the potato field was a task that typically took at least 2 days, but Kettle had finished it in just 2 hours. His speed was nothing short of remarkable. "Here's your payment," Rosa said. "Thank you." Kettle smiled faintly as he accepted the silver coins. While reviewing the task slip, Rosa spoke again. "Are you planning to take on more jobs? You seem to have plenty of time, so feel free to decide at your leisure." By now, Rosa was somewhat accustomed to dealing with Kettle. It had been a week since he began showing up at the Guildhall daily. Slowly but surely, she was adapting to the presence of this extraordinary barbarian. She wasn't the only one. Other mercenaries were also growing used to the enormous figure of Kettle. While his entrance still silenced the normally bustling Guildhall, it no longer plunged the room into total stillness. Conversations resumed cautiously, ensuring they didn't disturb him. Ordinarily, Kettle would have immediately requested his next task, but this time, he simply stared at the silver coins in his hand. Rosa noticed his uncharacteristic behavior and tilted her head in confusion. Before long, Kettle finally spoke. "It's very little." "Excuse me." For a moment, Rosa's heart seemed to stop, not figuratively, but quite literally. Has this barbarian taken offense to something? She thought. Her face went pale as she stammered. "Well, of course, Sir Kettle is an incredible and skilled mercenary, but the payment for this task is already set. While I sympathize, even someone as capable as you cannot expect the compensation to be adjusted arbitrarily." "No, I know that. I'm not blaming you," Kettle interjected, shaking his head. Rosa let out a relieved sigh. "I see. I just need more money." "Are you short on funds? I assumed you'd have plenty saved up." Though individual task rewards were modest, Kettle's sheer volume of completed jobs ensured he wasn't lacking for a comfortable living. "No, I have something to spend on," Kettle said. At some point, Kettle began to wonder how much longer he would have to keep wearing this leather vest. Though crafted from the hide of a beast he had slain, and undeniably functional, the vest hardly qualified as civilized clothing. He wondered if the reason people recoiled in fear whenever they saw him was because of his attire. After all, he, too, would hesitate to approach someone walking around in nothing but a leather vest in a modern society. As this thought crossed his mind, he felt a pang of regret. How barbaric had he become? After spending so much time among barbarians, even his values had begun to align with theirs. Determined to correct his mistake, he made a decision. He was going to buy new clothes. He sprang into action, stopping a passerby to ask about the nearest clothing store. The citizen kindly provided directions, and Kettle thanked them before heading off. Shopping in a fantasy world was an exciting prospect for him. With anticipation, he opened the door to the shop. The shopkeeper, however, turned pale and immediately called for the guards. Kettle calmly explained the misunderstanding, and order was restored. With that settled, he began browsing the store. It was his first time choosing clothes in this world, so he didn't want to settle for something cheap. Fortunately, the shop was of excellent quality and met his expectations. However, there was one problem. The clothes were too small. Kettle's physique was far larger than that of an average human. Off-the-rack options wouldn't suffice. He needed custom-made clothing. So he inquired about the price. After briefly assessing his measurements, the shopkeeper cautiously provided an estimate. The amount left Kettle stunned. The price far exceeded what he had imagined. It was more than his current funds could cover. He asked if the shopkeeper was trying to swindle him, but the trembling merchant's terrified demeanor convinced him otherwise. The sheer size of his body made crafting suitable clothing inherently expensive. This was the medieval era, after all. Unlike modern times, where machines manufactured garments, custom tailoring was a costly endeavor, especially for someone of Kettle's size. Reluctantly, he accepted the explanation. What mattered now was earning more money. After hearing Kettle's predicament, Rosa nodded in understanding. That makes sense. In such cases, it's possible to find yourself short on funds. Even though I'm working hard, it's tough to save enough. Is there any other way? Kettle asked. Rosa pondered for a moment. There was a way to earn more money, but she was hesitant about whether or not she should tell him. After a brief hesitation, she decided to tell him. Kettle was rational and polite, so there was no harm in sharing the information. There is a way to take on higher-paying jobs, she said. What, really? Yes, I heard you cleared a dungeon when you first arrived in this estate. It's something similar to that. Kettle, currently ranked as an F-class mercenary, couldn't accept dungeon-related tasks on his own. However, if he formed a party, the situation would change. With a minimum party of 4, you could qualify for higher-tier jobs, including dungeon expeditions. Oh, Kettle's eyes sparkled. When he had first cleared a dungeon, the reward had been significant, even after splitting it 4 ways. More than anything, the idea of venturing into another dungeon thrilled him. Forming a party, taking on roles, and conquering the unknown, it was one of his happiest experiences since arriving in this world. He still cherished that memory. A 4-person party, huh? So I need to gather a team, Kettle murmured. He turned to face the other mercenaries. Those who had been quietly eavesdropping flinched. They exchanged quick glances before the sound of chairs scraping against the floor filled the hall. Damn, I'm so busy today. Guys, let's get to work. In an instant, the mercenaries scattered, leaving Kettle alone in the guild hall. He murmured with a disappointed look. Everyone seems busy. Ha ha, Rosa laughed awkwardly. She knew full well that mercenaries who spent their days idling and drinking weren't suddenly busy, but some things were better left unsaid. In truth, Rosa hadn't mentioned this option earlier because she doubted any mercenary would dare form a party with Kettle. Is it impossible without a party? Kettle asked. Well, that's the rule, so. Rules are rules, I suppose. What a shame. As Kettle began brainstorming other solutions, the door creaked open. Both Kettle and Rosa turned toward the entrance. What's going on? The man said. Oh, Kettle's face lit up. Casson, long time no see. Eek! It was Casson, the thief, who immediately shrieked in terror. Casson was a thief and one of Kettle's former dungeon-clearing companions. Kettle strode toward him with his usual towering presence. The closer the barbarian got, the smaller Casson seemed to shrink. Kettle clapped a heavy hand on Casson's shoulder. It's been a while. How have you been? Ah, just getting by, Casson murmured, his voice shaky. Kettle beamed as he continued. So, you're a mercenary too. I haven't seen you around before. Ha ha ha. Kettle had never seen him in the guild hall because he had gone out of his way to avoid Kettle. The rumors of the gigantic barbarian had spread throughout the entire estate, and anyone who had heard them knew they referred to Kettle. To avoid an encounter, Casson had deliberately stayed away from the guild hall during the times Kettle was known to be there. And yet, fate had brought them face to face. Casson's expression grew gloomier. However, his misfortune didn't end there. As if a brilliant idea had struck him, Kettle clapped his hands together. That's it, this is perfect. Casson, how about clearing another dungeon with me? What? It's better to partner with someone experienced than someone new, isn't it? This is a great idea. Let's form a party and tackle a dungeon together. Casson tried to say something, but no words came out. Kettle suddenly grabbed both of Casson's shoulders. He felt as though his entire body was being crushed under the pressure. Instinctively, he nodded. Kettle grinned widely. Great, Rosa, we've got one person. Now we just need 2 more. That's wonderful, Rosa said, forcing a smile. Casson shot her a desperate look, silently pleading for help. Rosa averted her gaze. In the end, Casson couldn't bring himself to refuse Kettle's offer, and so he once again became a member of Kettle's party. Rosa, as if she had been waiting for this opportunity, spoke up. Well then, shall we invite those who have partied with you before, Kettle? Oh, is that even possible? Kettle asked. Yes, all of them are mercenaries. I see. Since I hadn't seen them around, I thought they had moved on to other work. Casson could guess why Kettle didn't see them. They probably all avoided the barbarian. It was obvious what would happen if they reunited. But their circumstances didn't concern Rosa at all. Kettle was a capable and exceptional mercenary. Not only that, but he was considerate and polite. To date, there hadn't been a single complaint about his tasks. At first, Kettle had been intimidating, but the more one got to know him, the more likable he became on a personal level. Rosa believed that 3 F-rank mercenaries wouldn't matter as sacrificial lamb. She rose from her seat. Please, wait here for a moment. I will bring them over. Not long after, 2 familiar faces walked in through the entrance, much to Kettle's delight. He greeted them with a bright smile and eager steps. Whoa-ho, Alexandros, Hayes, I can't believe it, what a surprise. Gah. Eek. Startled by Kettle's sudden approach, the 2 bolted back outside. After a minor commotion, the 4 of them finally gathered together. Kettle was beaming with satisfaction as he had reunited with his old comrades. The party was reassembled. What can be more exciting than this? Kettle thought. He was on cloud 9. In contrast, the other 3 hung their heads, their faces clouded with gloom. Oblivious to their somber mood, Kettle asked cheerfully, It's been a while, hasn't it? I heard you've been working as mercenaries. How have you all been? Just taking on small jobs here and there, Hayes replied. The other 2 nodded along. Kettle studied their faces and muttered, You don't look well. You are thinner than when I last saw you. This is a bit embarrassing, but I've realized I am not cut out for mercenary work, Hayes said with an awkward smile, scratching her cheek. The others seemed to feel the same. Casson was a thief with no skills or ability to disarm even basic treasure chests. Alexandros was a warrior who called himself a paladin and flew into a rage if anyone questioned his identity. And Hayes was a priestess who served a god of lies and deception. They were all outcasts. It was no wonder they couldn't handle proper jobs. They had barely been scraping by, half-starved. Realizing this, Kettle grinned widely. Don't worry, this mission will help you get back on your feet. Of course, the rewards will be distributed equally. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, Kettle added calmly, but if you have circumstances or don't feel up to it, you're free to decline my offer. I won't force you. Wait. We have no intention of refusing. All 3 shook their heads. Kettle sighed in relief. That's a relief. It would have been a bit troublesome if you said no. There is no reason to refuse, Hayes replied steadily. It wasn't because they were afraid to reject the barbarians' offer, but there truly was no reason to refuse. Looking at it objectively, the barbarian wasn't violent or rude. On the contrary, he was considerate and respectful toward them. Finding such a courteous mercenary was rare. He wasn't the kind to stir up trouble. Of course, he had his quirks, which were intimidating at times, but those instances were infrequent. Not to mention, Kettle was strong enough to take down the skeleton knight in a single strike. Having such a powerful ally join, their party was practically a stroke of luck. This might actually be a good thing, Casson thought to himself. For some reason, Kettle seemed genuinely fond of them. If that were the case, it was better to maintain their current relationship rather than pushing him away as they had been doing. Good, Kettle said, grinning with satisfaction. Rosa, can you show me the quest board? Okay, she replied. As if she had expected this, she pulled out a prepared quest board. There are various missions, but you're thinking about dungeons, right? That's right. Dungeon exploration was an incredibly thrilling prospect for him. Rosa handed over the request. Here are the dungeon-related missions. You can review and pick one. Oh, wow, Kettle's eyes sparkled. Even at a glance, the list was extensive. May I take a look first? I hope you guys don't mind. Oh, not at all. Feel free to do so. Smiling broadly, Kettle began reviewing the list. Watching this, the other three stepped back with weary expressions. They were a bit scared that someone could enjoy combat this much. A barbarian is a barbarian, after all, they thought. Kettle meticulously reviewed the quests. Various dungeons caught his eye: a lizardman dungeon, a trap-filled dungeon, an undead dungeon, and a goblin dungeon. Each of them was unique and fascinating. He couldn't stop smiling as he kept flipping through the list. And then he found something unusual. Hey, Rosa, Kettle said. What is it? She replied. These entries here don't list a difficulty level. The dungeons were typically categorized with difficulty ratings like E rank or D rank. However, the entries Kettle was looking at lacked such ratings. Rosa glanced over and let out a small noise, realizing her oversight. Oh, I forgot to write it on the quest board, but these are unexplored dungeons. Unexplored dungeons? Kettle asked. They're dungeons whose difficulty hasn't been assessed yet. Dungeons naturally formed near human settlements. Guard or mercenaries would usually explore these dungeons to roughly determine their difficulty levels. Even if they didn't delve deeply, that was usually enough to estimate the challenge. However, some dungeons remained unmeasured. There were several reasons for this. Lack of manpower to explore them, requirements for specific qualifications to enter, or, worst of all, dungeons that wouldn't allow a return until they were cleared. Interesting, Kettle muttered as his lips curled into a smile. His grin sparked a sense of unease in his party members. He leisurely reviewed the unexplored dungeons. One, in particular, grabbed his attention. The finite maze, what's this? It's exactly what it sounds like. The dungeon itself is a maze, Rosa replied. A maze, it's really a maze. Kettle was ecstatic. The most famous maze in his mind was the Labyrinth of the Minotaur. He loved the Greek myth surrounding it. Mazes were also a staple in most fantasy-related books. Kettle had even cleared multiple maze-themed games from his previous world. Mazes that required specific conditions to complete, mazes that constantly changed structure, and mazes that needed riddles to be solved for escape. Each one had been varied and entertaining. Naturally, he had often thought to himself that he wanted to experience a real maze someday. And now, that opportunity had come. Kettle made his decision without hesitation. This one, let's go with this. This one, are you sure? Rosa asked. Of course. So what do you mean by a dungeon itself being a maze? Well, when you're inside, an entity appears. You can then choose whether or not to take on the maze challenge. Beyond that, not much is known. So, no one who's challenged it has ever returned. No. Perfect. This is the one for me. What do you guys think? Kettle asked his party members as he grinned widely. Huh, Casson froze. Is he really thinking of going into an explored dungeon, and one where no one has ever come back? This was practically a death sentence. No one in their right mind would want to go in there. Casson was ready to refuse immediately. Of course, I won't force you. We're comrades. If any of you object, I will choose a different dungeon. But I would really like to go to this one, Kettle said. His eyes burned with enthusiasm as he spoke. Casson muttered. He couldn't answer right away. Kettle was respectful, considerate, and polite. As long as things didn't go off track, he wasn't scary. However, right now, things had gone off track. Casson wanted to refuse. He didn't want to enter an unexplored dungeon. Yet, he also didn't want to reject Kettle. He wasn't exactly afraid, but he was terrified. I'm fine with it, Casson eventually muttered, shutting his eyes tightly. He prayed with all his might that the other two would refuse. He prayed to a god he had never believed in before, from the bottom of his heart. A few minutes later, Kettle exclaimed with excitement, "All right, let's get going." The other three followed him with faces as pale as death. As they followed Kettle, they thought about why they couldn't just say no. However, they already knew the answer. Rationally, they understood that the barbarian wouldn't harm them even if they refused. But the sheer, overwhelming pressure Kettle exuded had consumed them, leaving logic powerless against it. Regardless of the reasons, the choice had already been made, and there was no turning back. Rosa had tried to stop Kettle, but in the end, she failed. Now they had to venture into the maze, a dungeon from which no one had ever returned, alongside the barbarian. "This is the place," Kettle said. A brick entrance stood a short distance from the estate. In front of it, a sign was planted in the ground. "Warning, unexplored dungeon, no survivors." "Well then, let's get going," Kettle said. "Okay." With pale faces, they followed Kettle into the dungeon. As Rosa had mentioned, there were no traps or monsters in sight. Yet this lack of danger only made the party, except for Kettle, more anxious. It felt as though no minor threats were necessary, because something far worse lay in wait ahead. They walked for a while, until they saw a single stone monument. "Is that it?" Kettle said. When he approached the monument, a figure appeared. It was a translucent being like a ghost. Kettle's face lit up with excitement. He had seen a ghost emerging from a monument countless times in stories, and now he was experiencing it firsthand. "Are you a challenger of this maze?" a low voice echoed. The ghost flinched slightly, seemingly unnerved by Kettle's fascinated gaze, but soon resumed its role with composure. "I am the manager of this dungeon, a guide for challengers. Visitors to this dungeon, will you take on the maze that one has yet conquered or retreat like cowards?" The party braced themselves, expecting Kettle to shout his intent to challenge it immediately. He had shown an intense interest in the maze from the start. However, instead of nodding, Kettle asked, "What kind of maze is it?" "I cannot answer that," the ghost replied. "What's the size of the maze?" "I cannot answer that." "Does the maze change its structure?" "I cannot answer that. All answers will be revealed within the maze." "So there's no information available from the outside." Kettle stroked his chin in thought. Then, as if concluding, he nodded. The party prepared themselves, thinking Kettle would finally declare his intent to challenge the maze. However, to everyone's surprise, Kettle turned back. "Then let's just head back." "Huh," the party members were shocked. "Are you giving up? That's fine as well." The ghost spoke calmly, as if it had expected this. Kettle smiled faintly. "I will be back soon. Wait for me." The party exited the dungeon. Bewildered, Casson asked, "Aren't you going to challenge it?" "What are you talking about?" Kettle looked at Casson as though the question made no sense. That gaze left Casson feeling strangely foolish, as if he were the one missing something. "I came here to gather information. It's a maze, so proper preparation is essential," Kettle said. Preparation. Upon returning to the estate, Kettle immediately visited a food shop. "Do you have dried foods? Something that will last at least a month would be ideal. Also, we need some alcohol. Water spoils, but alcohol doesn't. Oh, and fresh fruits if you have any. Kettle bought all sorts of supplies, mostly long-lasting provisions. However, he didn't stop there. He purchased a simple sleeping bag, a long thread, and anything else he thought necessary. Watching this, Casson finally snapped out of his daze. "What exactly are you doing?" "Preparing for the maze," Kettle replied as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We don't know the layout or the size of that maze. The only certainty is that no one has ever come back. It was a maze of significant difficulty. It's highly likely to take a considerable amount of time to clear the dungeon. Proper preparation is essential." Casson muttered. Now that he thought about it, Kettle's reasoning made sense. When attempting something with zero information, thorough preparation was indeed the correct approach. But you're a barbarian, Casson thought. He had never heard of a meticulous and well-prepared barbarian. "Judging by your expression, it seems you're not used to proper preparation," Kettle remarked with an understanding nod. "It's better to assume the worst-case scenario than to rely on hope. That increases survival rates. From now on, be thorough in your preparations for anything." Kettle even lectured them on preparation and survival. Casson's head began to spin. Wait, so in the end, Casson thought. Contrary to their assumptions, Kettle wasn't rushing in blindly out of fascination with the maze. He was fully aware of the risks, lack of information, the impossibility of return, and yet he still intended to challenge it. Isn't that even crazier? Casson revised his evaluation of the barbarian. He went from seeing Kettle as a reasonable yet eccentric barbarian to realizing he was just outright insane. Kettle continued his preparations. He shopped for nearly an hour, even purchasing an expensive rope. "It's costly, but cheaper than the price of a life. This should do," Kettle said. I see." Hayes looked exhausted as well. Being dragged around for an hour was enough to tire anyone. Kettle gathered all the supplies he had bought. The massive bundle, larger than a human torso, was effortlessly lifted by him as if it were an inflated balloon. "Well then, everything's ready. Let's head out," he said. "Okay." They returned to the dungeon. Upon seeing them, the ghost reappeared and spoke in a tone that hinted at disbelief. "You've returned, and well prepared at that," the ghost said. "It's a maze no one has returned from. There is no harm in being thoroughly prepared," Kettle replied. "I see." The ghost's expression seemed to convey how unbarbaric Kettle was. The party silently agreed. "No matter. So will you now challenge the maze or retreat once more?" the ghost asked. "We'll challenge it," Kettle declared. Reluctantly, the rest of the party followed suit. "I'll challenge it." "Damn it, I will challenge it too." "I'll challenge it." "Very well," the ghost replied. Creak. With their acceptance, the ghost waved its hand. The dungeon began to twist and distort with an eerie sound. "Enter now. Within the finite maze, if you succeed in clearing it, you will gain everything the maze possesses," the ghost said. "Those words, I'll hold you to them," Kettle said, grinning. For a moment, the ghost shuddered but quickly resumed its duties. Boom. A tremendous sound rang out. The dungeon began to collapse, or so it seemed. Rather than a collapse, it looked like an elaborate facade crumbling to reveal its true form. Walls opened, and floors fell away. The sight of what seemed like a world disintegrating left the party panicking in fear. Meanwhile, Kettle's eyes sparkled with excitement as he smiled. "Oh ho!" The dungeon transformed as its structure shifted, mingling with magic, shaking, and morphing. It was pure fantasy. Kettle's gaze was intense, as though he wouldn't miss a single detail of the spectacle. All creation seemed to crumble. The party covered their heads or rushed to parts of the dungeon that hadn't yet collapsed. But Kettle alone stood still, unmoving, as if he were part of a different world. He seemed detached, standing apart from reality. For a moment, the ghost stared blankly at him. Finally, the transformation ended, and they arrived at the maze. "So this is it," Kettle murmured as he smiled. The party, on the other hand, sighed in relief, reassured by the solidity of the ground beneath them. Ugh. I'm getting motion sickness. The sudden collapse and restructuring of the ground had shaken their brains, leaving them nauseous. Are you all right? Kettle asked. Yes, I think I'll be fine after a short rest, Hayes replied. Then rest while I take a look around. Kettle raised his head. He saw smooth steel walls surrounding them on either side. The width between the walls was about 5 meters, wide enough to move comfortably. The ceiling was about 10 meters high, with dimly glowing torches affixed to the walls, serving as guideposts in the pitch darkness. So it's really a maze, Kettle thought. It was one of those classic mazes he had read about. He couldn't help but smile. He couldn't believe that he was finally in a maze. He suppressed the laughter threatening to burst out. Hayes murmured, still nauseous. Damn it, if the ground's going to collapse, at least give us a warning first, Casson shouted. The party members, their nausea subsiding, began assessing their surroundings, but their reactions were the complete opposite of Kettle's. Despair and fear painted their faces. Looking around, Hayes turned pale. That over there. The other party members turned pale as they followed Hayes's gaze. There was a corpse. They didn't know how long it had been there, but it was perfectly skeletal, with not a scrap of flesh remaining. At its base, a phrase was inscribed. Abandon all hope. It felt as though they were looking at their own future. The party members were gripped with fear. Only Kettle approached the corpse with a calm demeanor. After examining it, he said, It's fake. What? A skeleton this clean would mean the body has been here for at least several months. If this place is sealed, it could be even longer. But has this dungeon existed for that long? And where are the clothes? Oh, the other party members finally realized that the skeleton was completely bare. Alexandros hesitantly suggested. Could they have stripped in despair at the end? If so, the clothes should be somewhere nearby. And look, the floor here is made of steel. To etch those words onto it, they would need some kind of tool or weapon, Kettle replied. He continued his examination of the skeleton. And the bones are too clean. There are no signs of fractures or cracks. It looks like a model skeleton. Realizing what Kettle meant, Hayes muttered, Is it a setup to scare us? It's not certain, but that seems likely. Still, if by any chance this is a real corpse, we should at least pay our respects. Kettle closed his eyes and solemnly offered a prayer. Watching this, the other party members came to a renewed understanding of Kettle. This barbarian was strong but not ignorant. He could calmly assess situations and discern their true nature. With this barbarian, they were beginning to think they would even escape the maze. Their despair began to fade slowly. We've faced life-threatening situations many times during our travels. This isn't anything new, Alexandros said. They were mercenaries, and before that, adventurers wandering the world. As Alexandros mentioned, they had encountered mortal perils many times. Even if we're teleported into the demon realm, as long as we stay grounded, we will survive, right? Alexandros continued. Is that a proverb from this world? Kettle murmured, amused. As Alexandros began exploring the maze, Hayes cried out in alarm. Wait, don't move carelessly. Alexandros froze mid-step, turning around stiffly. This is a maze. Since we don't know what kind, we need to assess everything carefully first, Hayes said. You're right, my mistake, Alexandros muttered, retreating sheepishly. Under normal circumstances, Casson might have mocked him, but not this time. If Alexandros hadn't moved, Casson might have gone first. The party began to analyze the area within their line of sight. Kettle, meanwhile, ran his hand along the walls. The walls are solid, Kettle thought. The steel walls were as tough as they appeared. When he knocked on them, a deep, heaving sound echoed, indicating significant thickness. Kettle closed his eyes, extending his senses. Even with his heightened awareness, he couldn't detect an exit. The maze is vast. Kettle withdrew his senses. Walking through the entire area would take considerable time. He wondered how this large space could fit within the small dungeon. So this too is the power of magic. Kettle thought about what a dungeon was and what lay at its end. His curiosity surged. Meanwhile, the party discovered writing on the wall. "Kettle, come here," Hayes shouted. "Oh, is there an explanation?" Kettle looked at the wall with an intrigued expression. 1. This maze is finite. 2. This location is the center of the maze. 3. The maze is square-shaped. 4. The maze has only one floor. 5. The exit is located at the edge. 6. There is no time limit. 7. There are no riddles or special methods to escape the maze. 8. The maze does not change. 9. There are no direct threats to adventurers in the maze. "It really is a maze," Kettle muttered. They read each line carefully, trying to extract any useful information. Hayes summarized, "So we're in the center of the maze, and the exit is on the edge. Also, it only has one floor." They racked their brains, searching for hints. "There's just not enough information here," Casson remarked. "If only there were more hints," Hayes said. Isn't this enough?" Kettle chimed in, surprising them. He looked at his comrades with a puzzled expression. "What do you mean there's enough?" Hayes asked. "If we take the writing at face value, this maze doesn't change, and there are no puzzles or special methods. That means it's a very straightforward maze." "Right. So, we just need to approach it using standard maze-solving methods. There's no need to overthink it." Standard method? Hayes wondered what standard methods Kettle was talking about. As simple mercenaries, they had no idea how to navigate a maze properly. Then, she suddenly exclaimed as if she had realized something. I know how to solve it." "What, you know how?" Kettle asked. "I learned about this once." Hayes was a priestess, a woman educated in the teachings of the divine. Because her role involved missionary work, she had received extensive training. Among the many lessons, there had been one about mazes. Hesitantly, she placed her hand against the steel wall. "You just need to keep your hand on the maze's wall and move along." "Huh," Alexandros said. "What's the method of solving this maze? That doesn't make sense at all," Casson replied. The two of them looked baffled. Solving a maze by merely keeping one's hand on the wall didn't make sense logically. However, Kettle nodded as though he understood what Hayes was talking about. "You're talking about the hand-on-wall rule, right?" "Oh, you've heard of it," Hayes said. "It's not a complicated concept." The hand-on-wall rule was not complicated at all, at least not for Kettle. When Hayes first learned about it, she had struggled for hours to understand, racking her brain the entire time. Yet, the barbarian appeared to grasp the concept effortlessly. Momentarily startled, Hayes cleared her throat and began explaining. "Think about it. A maze is ultimately a connected structure." "A connected structure?" Casson asked. "Hm," Alexandros muttered. The two of them still looked confused. It was difficult to explain with words alone, so Hayes picked up a dagger. She intended to draw a maze on the floor to demonstrate. Screech. However, the steel floor didn't even get scratched by her dagger. She was utterly surprised. No matter how many times she tried, all she achieved was dulling the blade. Watching quietly, Kettle raised his axe. "Let me try." "Thank you. I need the shape to be." Hayes started to say something, but Kettle began carving into the floor with his axe. Unlike her dagger, the floor split smoothly under the blade of his axe, as if it were made of clay. "I was going to explain how to draw it." Hayes's voice trailed off. At the tip of Kettle's axe, the shape of the maze began to take form. It was a quintessential maze, no inconsistencies, no unnecessary complexity, and with a clean, logical structure. How is this possible? Hayes was stunned. Creating a proper maze was one of the most challenging tasks imaginable. Sure, even a 3-year-old child could draw a simple maze, but such attempts would be riddled with contradictions and irregularities. A textbook maze required a precise structure and clear rules. It demanded adherence to these principles and a deep understanding of their intricacies. Merely being intelligent wasn't enough to create a functional maze. It required extensive education and a grasp of spatial concepts, which was an advanced field of study. It wasn't something a barbarian could ever be expected to learn. Yet, it was a different story for Kettle. "Have you ever studied mazes before?" Hayes asked cautiously. The idea that a barbarian could have received such education seemed ludicrous, yet the circumstances forced her to ask. Kettle shook his head. "Not formally. I've never received any specific education about them." His understanding of mazes stemmed from personal curiosity rather than formal instruction. More importantly, most of his knowledge was from Earth, which was from a different world, so it was difficult to explain. Hayes's shock only deepened. "I see. Is drawing a maze really such a big deal?" Alexandros looked puzzled, as did Casson. To them, designing such an ordinary maze seemed like a task anyone could accomplish. However, Hayes, who had studied these concepts extensively, couldn't agree. She knew how many intricate rules were embedded in something that appeared so simple. Among her fellow students, many had failed to create a functional maze even after numerous practical sessions. And yet, this barbarian had grasped the concept effortlessly through mere observation and thought. Is he a genius? Hayes thought. Was this barbarian truly a genius, someone who defied all my preconceptions? The idea of associating the words barbarian and genius made her head spin. However, she quickly dismissed the thought. It wasn't the time to dwell on such matters. The pressing question was whether they could escape this maze or not. If Kettle understood the concept, his knowledge could be their key to survival. With a determined shift in her focus, Hayes said, "Let's concentrate on what's in front of us." Kettle nodded. "Understood," Casson and Alexandros said in unison as they turned their attention to the maze drawn on the ground by Kettle's axe. Pointing to its center with her slender finger, Hayes began to explain. "Let's assume this is where we are. By placing one hand on the left wall and following it, we can explore the entire maze." Initially, Alexandros and Casson exchanged uncertain glances. But as Hayes traced her finger along the maze's walls, their expressions shifted to astonishment. Her finger glided continuously, navigating the entire layout. This actually works," Casson stammered. "All the walls in this maze are connected," she explained. "By keeping one hand on either the left or the right wall, you will eventually find the exit." The two men were amazed. That such a simple method existed had never crossed their minds. Hayes continued calmly, "This maze is a classic example of its kind. If the design holds true to form, the method will work. So, if we keep our hands on the wall and keep moving, will we escape eventually?" Alexandros asked eagerly. "There is a good chance of it. Though the maze might be large, Kettle brought plenty of supplies," Hayes replied. With provisions sufficient for at least a month, and possibly longer if rationed carefully, they had the resources they needed. Alexandros and Casson's faces lit up with hope. "We can escape. This is incredible. I never would have thought of this." Their relief was palpable, and Hayes shared in their optimism. If the maze adhered to its classic structure, there was no need to fear. However, Kettle wore a more ambiguous expression. "Do you really think it'll be that simple?" "What?" "It's nothing. Let's give it a try. No sense in hesitating when time is limited," Kettle said, shrugging off his doubt. "You're right, we only have a finite amount of supplies," Hayes replied. The group agreed. With Hayes leading, they placed their hands on the wall and prepared to move forward. "Let's go," Hayes ordered, her voice steady but laced with apprehension. Walking in single file, their hands firmly pressed against the wall, they moved through the maze. Though their formation might have looked absurd, none of them dared laugh. They clung to the wall as though letting go would cast them into some abyss. Their progress was slow and tense. The first fork in the path loomed ahead. "What do we do now?" Casson asked. "Nothing changes. Keep your hand on the wall and continue forward," Hayes replied firmly. They pressed on, following her advice. Each fork they encountered was met with the same resolve, and they never let go of the wall. As they advanced, Kettle observed something unusual. "There's a torch at every intersection." "What?" Hayes replied. Torches were evenly spaced throughout the maze. Hayes assumed they were simply there to illuminate the dark and didn't give them much thought. However, Kettle observed the torches with interest, as though he found something intriguing about them. Hayes was curious about his reaction, but decided that advancing through the maze was more urgent. They continued forward, gradually losing their sense of time and even forgetting how far they had traveled. The tension was suffocating, making it feel as though they could collapse at any moment. Despite losing track of time and distance in the oppressive silence, they continued until finally, they arrived at the starting point, where they discovered the skeleton. "What?" Casson shouted. The group stared in disbelief. They had returned to their starting point. Despite keeping their hands on the wall and methodically navigating the maze, they had ended up back where they began. Even Casson and Alexandros, who didn't fully grasp the concept, could sense that something had gone terribly wrong. "Hayes, what's going on?" Alexandros asked. Hayes, however, was the most flustered of them all. "Why are we back here? It shouldn't have been possible. If we kept one hand on the wall while moving, we weren't supposed to end up in a palace we had already visited." "Looks like it's not as simple as that," Kettle remarked with a knowing expression. "What do you mean?" Hayes asked. "It's not that complicated. The structure of the maze is just a little different," Kettle said casually as he knelt and began to redraw the maze on the ground. The new diagram resembled the one he had drawn earlier, but there was a subtle difference. "The maze I drew before assumed that the walls were connected, but what if there are inner walls that aren't connected to the outer ones?" "Oh," Hayes's face turned pale. Kettle traced a section of the maze with his finger, moving it along a circular path. The route endlessly spiraled back on itself, trapping them in a loop. "The method you mentioned, keeping a hand on the wall, can work, but not in this case," Kettle said. That can't be." The idea of disconnected inner walls had never occurred to Hayes. She had never been taught such a concept. The realization that their escape method was useless drained the color from Casson and Alexandros's faces as well. "Then what are we supposed to do now?" Casson asked. "I don't know, this is all I've learned," Hayes replied. A brief exchange of panicked shouts led to a single conclusion. Their only escape method didn't work in this maze. They couldn't get out. Hope turned to despair, and the group sank to the floor, overwhelmed by fear of death, all except for Kettle, who looked intrigued. "So, it's a bit more complicated than we thought. Well, it would have been too easy if the hand-on-wall rule alone could solve it," he said with a smirk. Hayes's frustration boiled over. Though she was usually intimidated by the barbarian, the dire circumstances emboldened her. "How can you say that so calmly? Our only escape method has failed. We are all going to die like this." Of course, even her boldness amounted to little more than an exasperated voice. What are you talking about?" Kettle responded with a puzzled look. "There is a way out." "What?" Hayes asked. "Are you serious?" The despairing Casson shot to his feet, his eyes wide with hope. Kettle nodded nonchalantly. "There is. It's a much more reliable method than the one we just tried." Then why didn't you tell us earlier?" Hayes asked. Kettle answered nonchalantly. "It's the first time I've tried using the hand-on-wall rule. I wanted to see how it worked in practice. It was fun." He had known about the inefficiency of the rule, but in the modern world, there were no mazes to test them in. So, he had been curious and wanted to experience it for himself. He even confirmed how the method failed when inner walls existed. It was quite satisfying for Kettle. "You put us through that for your own amusement?" Hayes asked. "Exactly." Kettle grinned brightly, his expression brimming with joy. Hayes and the others were dumbfounded. But deep down, they understood that this barbarian was the kind of person who prioritized his curiosity above all else. After 2 party missions with him, they had learned that much. Still, the important thing now was that he knew a way out. "What is it? I've never heard of any other method," Hayes said. "Really? You don't know?" Kettle stroked his chin thoughtfully. While the hand-on-wall rule was widely known, the technique he had in mind wasn't. In fact, it hadn't been formalized until the 1800s. even though mazes had existed in myths for centuries. Principles that seemed simple in hindsight often took ages to become established theories. "Well, the method I'm thinking of would work for escaping, but it would take quite a bit of time," Kettle said. This maze was enormous, and his method would require significant effort. It was possible, but there was no need to resort to such a tedious approach. "I've had my fun. Let's go with the fastest method now." Kettle raised his fist. The others instinctively sensed what he was about to do and panicked, scrambling to get away. Boom! A deafening roar echoed as debris exploded in every direction. Ugh! Oh my God! The party members screamed and crouched to protect themselves. When the dust finally settled and they dared to look up, the scene before them left them utterly shocked. The impossibly thick wall, which could have withstood a cannonball, was gone, obliterated so thoroughly that even the floor beneath it was destroyed. "This is the fastest way," Kettle said cheerfully. "Well, I guess it is," Hayes admitted, her face pale with disbelief. The maze's exit, where no one had ever reached, the ghost resided. Behind it stood a massive treasure chest, its size promising a reward far beyond modest means. But the fruit that hung too high to be grasped held no meaning. Since the dungeon's creation, no one had ever conquered the maze. The ghost let out a long, weary sigh. "Whoever created me, I wish they'd placed me in a more reasonable place." The ghost didn't know where this palace was. Bound to the dungeon, it had no knowledge of the world outside. However, it could gauge the general level of those who entered the dungeon. They were all simple, brutish individuals, those lacking intellect or composure, seeking quick riches. None of them had ever been worthy of clearing this maze. Ah, how sorrowful. When would someone capable of clearing this maze finally appear? The ghost thought. Its sole purpose for existing was to offer praise and reward to the one who overcame the maze. That was all. However, it didn't know when that purpose would be filled. "There were some adventurers that came into the dungeon," the ghost murmured. It thought of the barbarian, the thief, the priestess, and the warrior that entered the maze. The party members were pretty standard, and there was nothing particularly notable about them. Yet the barbarian was peculiar. The ghost didn't know how to describe it, but there was something different about him compared to the other fools who had entered this place. However, at the end of the day, he was still just a barbarian. Rumble. A rumbling sound echoes through the maze. Though faint and far away, it was distinct. The ghost ignored it. Adventurers causing commotions while failing to navigate the maze was a common occurrence. Rumble. However, the sound grew louder, steadily drawing closer, enough to demand the ghost's attention. It was then that the ghost realized something was approaching, and that something was likely the adventurers that ventured into the dungeon. "Wait," the ghost murmured. They hadn't been in the maze for long. Could they have already found the exit? No, impossible. That's absurd. Not even an archmage's detection magic or a swordmaster's sensory abilities could locate the exit. The maze was simply too vast. Well, technically it is possible, the ghost thought. If they were of the hero class, they could clear the dungeon. Though bound to the dungeon, the ghost held a general understanding of the world. This knowledge had been embedded in its existence as a ghost. Heroes were monsters in their own right. Even this sprawling maze could be fully mapped by their senses. However, even for a hero, reaching the exit so quickly was impossible. Detection and navigation were entirely different matters. Yet the growing rumble was now right at its doorstep. The ghost finally grasped the nature of the sound and was struck with shock. "What in the world?" the ghost murmured. "This is impossible. Not even a hero could manage this." This was the cardinal rule of this world, a fundamental concept of the world that should not be broken. So it couldn't be happening. Rumble. That denial shattered in an instant. The door guarding the exit exploded into fragments, debris scattering in all directions. Beyond the obliterated door, white teeth gleamed. "Oh, we've arrived," the barbarian said as he stepped out of the maze. "It is nice to see you again." Kettle flashed a sly grin. The ghost could only stare at him blankly, unable to utter a single word. Soon after, the sound of several footsteps echoed, and 3 figures came into view. "Huff, huff, Kettle, you're too fast," Hayes complained. "I thought I was going slow enough. My apologies," Kettle replied casually. Catching their breath, the party lifted their eyes to scan the area. They stood in a spacious chamber, where the ghost hovered near a treasure chest at the center. Realizing this was likely the end of the maze, their faces lit up with excitement. Kettle spoke slowly. "This must be the end of the maze, wouldn't you agree? We've cleared it, Ghost." Finally, the ghost spoke, its tone trembling as if it was still reeling from the shock. "What have you done?" Although it already suspected the answer, the ghost couldn't help but ask. "I broke the wall. I knew the exit was along the perimeter, so I took a 1 in 4 chance." "I didn't expect to succeed on the first try," Kettle answered with nonchalance. He smiled smugly as he added, "There are many ways to clear a maze, but the most practical one is breaking its walls." A maze, after all, was just a square grid enclosed by walls. Remove the walls, and finding a path would be a breeze. So he broke through the walls, shattering the integrity of the maze itself. "It's a simple but effective solution," Kettle said. "Wow," Hayes murmured in amazement. "Incredible," Alexandros agreed, and Casson nodded in admiration. They marveled at Kettle's ingenious method and his decisive action, a testament to his barbarian prowess. Meanwhile, the ghost was flabbergasted. It wanted to scream, "That's impossible." Adventurers in the past had entertained the idea of breaking the walls, but none had ever succeeded. The reason was straightforward. The maze was designed so that such an approach wouldn't work. "You're speaking nonsense. The maze's walls cannot be broken. They are governed by immutable rules," the ghost said. "Ah, so that's what it meant," Kettle muttered as if understanding something. He recalled the inscription detailing the maze's properties. One line had stood out. 8. The maze does not change. Kettle pondered the phrase. He wondered if it meant the maze's layout was static, or if it also blocked external interference. Judging by the ghost's reaction, it seemed to imply the latter. "I thought it was odd how easy it was to leave marks on the maze floor. Turns out I was right. But as you can see, the wall did break. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" Kettle tilted his head inquisitively. "No, I'm not mistaken. The maze's walls cannot be altered. It's a fundamental rule," the ghost replied. "But I broke them." Kettle's confusion was genuine. The ghost faltered, unable to respond. These walls were not merely physical barriers. They were the embodiment of a concept, an unbreakable law of the dungeon. Yet the barbarian had clearly shattered them. "If that's the case, then I must have broken the rule itself," Kettle said lightly. "So the walls were designed to be indestructible, huh? Makes sense. That would have been too easy otherwise." Kettle laughed, but the ghost retorted sharply. "No, breaking the rule is impossible." "And why is that?" Kettle asked. "Because it is a dungeon rule. No matter how strong you are, you cannot break it." Kettle's lips curved into a curious smile. "You say dungeon rules cannot be broken. How are you so sure?" "It's simple. It's the law of this place." "I'm not asking for a theory. I'm asking for proof. You're a ghost bound to this dungeon, are you not?" "Yes," the ghost admitted as much. Its knowledge was limited to this dungeon alone. It had neither seen the outside world nor encountered its mightiest beings. "So all your certainty is based on this relatively small, well, perhaps not that small dungeon. You don't know about other dungeons, nor about the strongest wings in the world. How can you be so certain, then?" Kettle asked. "Well, because it's a rule, an unbreakable concept," the ghost thought. However, Kettle wasn't questioning the concept itself. He was questioning the ghost's first-hand experience. He was asking if it truly had verified that the rule was absolute. The ghost had no answer. Its understanding of the law stemmed from the knowledge imprinted on it upon its creation. It knew nothing of the world beyond the maze. Birds flying in the sky and fish swimming in the water were one of the many truths the ghost had learned, but never seen with its own eyes. "I cannot be certain," the ghost replied. In the end, it had no choice but to admit its uncertainty. Kettle stroked his chin, intrigued by the ghost's inner turmoil. You say some fascinating things, he remarked, finding the ghost predicament both amusing and thought-provoking. Though shackled to the dungeon, the ghost had spoken with surprising detail about the outside world, albeit based on incorrect assumptions about the maze. This implied someone had fed the ghost this information. Kettle's curiosity deepened. After gathering its thoughts, the ghost spoke again. Very well, you have succeeded in reaching the maze's exit. I acknowledge that. Woohoo! Kettle's companions erupted in cheers. However, I cannot grant you a reward. Their jubilant expressions froze. The ghost continued in a calm, steady voice. Although you've reached the exit, your method did not adhere to the maze's rules. I made it clear. You would receive a reward only if you cleared the maze following its intended guidelines. Clearing the maze using an exploit could not be considered a legitimate conquest. Thus, there would be no reward. Despair clouded the faces of Kettle's party members. After coming so close to death, they were about to walk away with nothing. Kettle, however, seemed entirely unfazed, as though he had expected this outcome. In that case, if I present a method of clearing the maze that adheres to the rules, would we then be eligible for the reward? Kettle asked. What? The ghost was shocked. Of course, we couldn't actually implement it now since the maze is already in ruins. But if I can provide a method that you, as the maze's overseer, deem to be in accordance with its rules, would that suffice? It would, the ghost answered after pondering for a moment. The party had already reached the exit. If Kettle could describe a solution that aligned with the maze's principles, there was no reason to deny it. However, the ghost assumed that there was no way this brute barbarian, who had demolished the maze walls with sheer force, knew the proper way to clear the maze. Its gaze grew skeptical as it silently urged Kettle to explain. The moment Kettle opened his mouth, however, the ghost's expression froze. This maze has torches, Kettle began explaining. Torches were positioned at regular intervals throughout the maze, providing illumination to guide adventurers through the dark passages. They're always spaced evenly, except at intersections, Kettle continued. At the intersections, there is always a torch in each direction, including the one leading back to where we came from. So here's the strategy. Extinguish the torches in the direction you came from and the one for the path you wish to take. That's the solution. The ghost was stunned into silence, but Kettle could feel the shock and awe from its expression. Hayes, who had been listening quietly, tilted her head in confusion. That's the strategy, she asked, skeptical. Extinguishing torches seemed too simple for such a complex and challenging maze. A maze is essentially a system of countless paths, but only one leads to the correct exit. All other routes are dead ends, Kettle replied. The moment you enter a path, you leave a trace indicating it's been traversed. If that path turns out to be a dead end, those traces become markers to eliminate it as an option. Hayes still looked puzzled. Kettle shrugged lightly and said, You don't need to overthink it. Imagine you're sealing off blocked paths. The torches are just a tool for doing that. It does not have to be torches. String or breadcrumbs could work, though they'd require more resources. Hayes mumbled, racking her brain. It took her a while, but as realization dawned on her, her expression shifted to one of sheer astonishment. It is possible. Following Kettle's method, even a maze with internal barriers could eventually be solved. It was a simple yet brilliant concept. Still in shock, Hayes stammered, How did you? I just find these things interesting, Kettle replied casually, though Hayes found it impossible to accept his nonchalant explanation. What Kettle had described wasn't just a method. It was a theoretical framework for maze solving that encapsulated countless trials and errors. For a maze like this, Kettle's method was universally applicable. It didn't even require significant resources, just small markers left at intersections. It was incredibly straightforward, yet something few would think of on their own. Hayes herself only understood it after Kettle explained it, and Alexandros and Casson still looked thoroughly bewildered. This barbarian, she thought, he's a genius. Kettle noticed her awestruck gaze and offered a faint smile. He had a sense of what she was thinking, but he knew he was no genius. He simply knew a lot. What he had described was the Tremox algorithm, a maze-solving theory established in the 1800s. It was a logical method that included practices like dragging a thread or dropping breadcrumbs to systematically explore a maze. Kettle only knew it because it was knowledge he had learned. He knew many things that his comrades didn't, not because he was extraordinary, but because he was from a modern world. He was privy to countless stories and theories accumulated by millions over centuries. He understood strategies and concepts developed by brilliant minds and simplified into rules even ordinary people could grasp. All of this was knowledge shared and refined in the modern era. However, Kettle couldn't explain that to them, so he simply smiled. Meanwhile, the ghost pondered over Kettle's solution. It wondered if the amaze could truly be cleared using this method. The answer was clear. Yes, it could. Although the maze was vast and the process would take considerable time, the correct path would inevitably be discovered. That was how this maze was designed. In the end, the ghost had no choice but to concede. This barbarian could indeed clear the maze. Very well, it finally said. The ghost could see hope returning to the faces of Kettle's companions. You have described a viable solution for clearing the maze, and it is indeed possible. Thus, you have successfully cleared it. That's wonderful news, Kettle replied with a grin. Challengers, you have triumphed over this dreadful maze. You are the first and likely the last to do so. Reap the rewards befitting your accomplishment. As the ghost finished speaking, the treasure chest burst open, revealing its contents.